Radio check, radio check, radio check. This is the Explorer's Pod over.
4, 3, 2, 1. Good morning. Welcome back. Good to have you, Carl. First of all, Janet and I'd like to welcome you aboard once again. So, how's it going?
It's a pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me. Great to see you again. I'm good, considering it's 2020 and all that, but I'm doing okay personally.
Yeah, a little feedback on that. I was curious about your situation down there. You've heard our story a bit, but what's going on with you and COVID and that area of the world? Are you guys in any sort of lockdown, or do you have mask requirements? What's up?
At the moment, there's in October, we've just got notification from the local government that we're going back into a lockdown.
Oh.
So as of the end of this week, well, tomorrow and the next day, then we're going to start seeing establishments closed down. There's going to be nothing open at night.
Wow.
Restaurants can only deliver food or take away. So they're starting to bring it back down because they think this third wave has finally started to impact
So this is your third
Alaska
wave.
here
Wow.
in Mexico. They're saying for now we're looking at trying to do this for about 14 days.
Okay.
You know, we're heavy on the mask use and everything, so it's pretty much like everywhere else.
Yeah, we've been pretty extreme. You know, we've been in lockdown for over 200 days, but we've heard some good news recently. We're supposed to open up our borders domestically from island to island somewhere on December 1st, I think it is.
Yes.
So we might be able to get some sort of commerce going in our little village. So we're pretty excited about that.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it's been pretty rough there.
Yes. So it's my turn, Carl, to welcome you. It's really nice to see you. It's going to be a year since we met in Dubai, and it's really one of the most memorable events in our life. Todd and I were very grateful that we were there, and we met good people, amazing people like you. That's why we wanted you to be part of the show, and thank you for gracing our show. Thank you, Carl.
Pleasure to be talking again.
Yeah. And so with that welcome note, we would like to play a short clip for our audience as an introduction on the Goliath expedition. We would like to play this clip number 1. Maddie?
He's not getting any video on his side. You got the virtual cam on? Okay, I see it. Yeah. Shut that speaker off.
Actually,
Oh, you know, that short little video, your highlights, it's just touches on a small fraction of the Goliath expedition. 22 years. 22 years you've been on this incredible journey. I'd like to say, just right off the bat, you are an absolute savage. You are an incredible human being. The stories that we're going to tell today are going to blow some minds off some of our audience. Some of the stuff you've done have been quite incredible. Very proud to know you and know you as a human being. The will and the drive that you have is beyond measure. What I really want to get to, just to start with, is like, how did you become you? Where did it all start?
yeah, I mean, I think you can look back. I can look back into my childhood and pick out elements that really made the bricks that built this house. So as a young boy with a real passion for wandering off and disappearing for days on end, and I had a real thing for horizons, a bit of a natural history. Oddly enough, I became a British paratrooper, which was like the family tradition. And during the time in the army, well, as a British paratrooper, our jobs historically is to be dropped behind enemy lines, We have to be self-sufficient. We live on our feet. And so within the regiment, there is a very strong focus on the physical fitness and the endurance. And all of that kind of plays into eventually how this expedition came about. I was destined to be a career soldier, like the rest of the members of my family. Unfortunately, I was in parachute regiment during one of the most peaceful times over the past couple of decades. There wasn't a lot going on in the world. So our minds began to wander, and I began looking at those horizons and the maps, and ended up, I guess, fusing those two influential parts of my life. That going the distance, on your feet, with everything you need, that self-reliant, and that all played into eventually looking at doing these long distance walks, unsupported, self-sufficient. And that kind of spiraled, and eventually ended up finding the route that we looked at, from my hometown all the way out to the southern tip of South America. That was the initial, and it was an interesting development, because at the time I was in the battalion looking at all these ideas and options around the world. One I was really interested in was the trip from North South America. And I was looking at other trips across Asia, but all of these were like, 5 or 6 year trips. Mm-hmm. It wasn't anything worth leaving a career for. It wasn't anything that impactful.
Right.
I was just, had these fantasies in the back of my mind and kept looking at maps. And it wasn't until one day I got a birthday card from my father that he taught inside his birthday card. On the inside, he'd written a note. And in there was a story about a couple of guys from the Special Forces, because my father is ex-Special Forces, who had talked about the possibility of walking from London to New York over something called the Bering Land Bridge.
So it was discussed.
Which I'd never heard of at the time. Right. And then that was a kind of moment. There were a couple of moments, but that was probably one of the biggest moments, I think, when I realized that, wait a minute, I can connect these continents. So I literally had a wall map above my office desk. And I remember at one point, I grabbed a Sharpie and drew a line from the UK all the way across Asia over this so-called Bering Land Bridge. And I couldn't work out why anybody would want to stop in New York. So just took it down to the bottom of South America. And that was it. You can feel the hairs on the back of your neck stand up.
Right.
That's when you've got what you've been looking for probably a few years now. And as soon as I started focusing on that, I realized it'd never been done. The numbers were stupid. I mean, best possible case, you're looking at 12 years, 36,000 miles possibly, 25 countries. And once I started doing the math, but of course, at the time, we had no idea what the Bering Strait was all about. It was all theoretical at that point.
I mean, how old were you then? I mean, you weren't even very old to sort of rational thinking. Was even rational thinking in
should have been. I was in my late 20s at that point. So you're looking at a frame over from 26, 27, 28, and all this was happening.
Okay.
Wow. Well, it really gave me some chills, listening to that, and how you started off and how everything blended up. So that's really awesome, Karl. I know this is the Goliath expedition. Goliath, the name itself, I think it's very fitting, and it's very suitable with the expedition. Who thought about this name? Did you, or you just,
No.
like a light bulb? It's like, bing, Goliath.
It was some friend's mother. She literally made a comment. We were talking about it at one point. She said, "That's a bit of a Goliath."
Right.
And that was it. It just stuck. We just ran with it. I mean, at that time, I had no idea what the word expedition even really meant. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just putting this walk dream thing together, and then slowly was learning. It's got to have a name, and you've got to do this and you've got to do that. And then we didn't have a name or anything specific to define it. And it was a friend's mother who just casually mentioned it was a bit of a Goliath, this whole idea. And I was like, there you go, let's just use that. That sounds good.
Perfect.
And that's how the name came about.
Tell us about 1998, November 1st, day one, the Goliath expedition. What happened? What was that day like?
Yeah, that's an unusual day. I find myself looking down a 36,000-mile, 12-year road at best, not having a clue how any of this is going to work out. You've got a couple of $100 in your pocket. You've got no support whatsoever. You're on your own, and you've got literally no idea how you're going to get home. You've burnt all your bridges, told everyone it's do or die, and that's it. It's like the world, crack on. So it was, and it'd taken quite a bit an effort to get to that point. So
Sure.
it was a pretty special day. And I'd arrived in Punta Arenas, Chile, 2 days prior. I arrived, I think, on a Friday, and we got out of the airport into town, and I had the Beast, which was this trolley that I had made in the UK for like £400 sterling. I had taken a golf trolley and give it to an engineering company, some local guys, and said, I need something that's going to last forever, carry 100 pounds of equipment.
Mm-hmm.
They made this thing.
Right.
And I put it together. I literally put it together on the side of the road in the dark at night, and then wandered off to find somewhere to sleep that night. I got 20 yards, and the wheelhouse, using these bike wheels, the bearing housing split, started pouring out, and the wheel came loose. And I was immobile. I literally remember standing looking at this, looking back at the pavement where I just put it together, and thought, well, I've got 20 yards on this 30,000-mile adventure, so now I'm stuck. So I thought that was an interesting beginning.
Oh, yeah.
So I ended up spending 2 days waiting until the shops opened on Monday morning, so I could find a bike shop, get some wheels, and actually begin. So then, by the time I actually started, it was, November the 1st. And it's a little overwhelming to some degree. You work so hard to get to that point, but that morning, and of course it's Day of the Dead in Latin American, and I was sleeping next to the graveyard. I'd pitched tent next to a graveyard on a main street. So I distinctly remember that morning the odd celebrations going on behind me. There was a big parade. Everyone dressed up like skeletons and whatnot,
Right.
all very surreal. So my first Day of the Dead experience in Latin America.
Yeah, you were definitely part of
I
it.
just remember that morning casually getting my stuff together, packing the tent, and moving everything onto the road, and thinking, shit, here we go. This is it, literally. And it was an odd feeling to start that walk, to actually start moving one's feet, one in front of the other, and not really knowing how long, how far.
Wow.
And
Incredible.
what a story
Wow.
to turn into.
Yeah, so I'd say day one doesn't sound like it was easy, So it's a bit of a poetic justice. Bring it on. Here we go. It's incredible. It starts hard. Why not? Let's do it. So,
Yeah.
Incredible.
It was a bit of a rough start.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, so when you started in Patagonia, Carl, how did you feel? Feeling awkward and feeling strange?
It was a real adventure. I'd never been in the real world by myself. I'd always been part of the army. I traveled a lot, but as part of a massive system, this huge machine, the British Army.
Right.
So being by oneself was interesting, an incredible sense of freedom. I mean, a real incredible sense of freedom. Like, I got all the time in the world to go in any direction I want, to a degree. I've just got to follow this line north, however which way I want to do it. It was exciting, incredibly exciting, very exotic part of the world. Everything was new. The beast kept falling apart. Several times the wheels fell off in the middle of nowhere, and I had to figure that one out.
You got to talk to those guys, those builders, hey?
Give them a feedback.
Yeah, it was the design. I mean, they probably did what they could, but the actual design was yeah, definitely off.
Right.
And I was learning some interesting lessons from day one. I think one of the first ones, literally from almost day one, was local kindness. I remember at one point wandering off the beaten path a little bit and finding a really remote house out in the middle of nowhere with an local indigenous Indian family who took me in and fed me. And nobody said a word, nobody spoke. Everything was just kind of pointing. And they just like beckoned me in, put me down on a chair, and then put food in front of me. It's so weird. It's like like their son just coming home or something.
Right.
And then they would put tea and a cake and some food, and
beautiful.
And then it was hugs and out the door and away you go. And I was like, what the hell was that? I mean, someone come from the West.
You're on your way.
A big city.
You've got your meal.
That was like
off to work.
That was weird. Yeah, that was just weird. And that was just setting the stage for things to come. I mean, it really was an eye opener. And especially as an ex-soldier who hadn't particularly seen the best of the world, yeah, that really set the stage, I think, for the next 20 years. It was amazing.
Yeah, wow. So Patagonia, I've read a lot about Patagonia. Janet and I have looked at some climbs down there. One of the things I hear is, there's a lot of fierce cold wind there, pretty remote terrain. And somewhere in your book, The Giant Steps, I was reading something about near starvation. What's that story? What happened there?
Well, I mean, I only had a couple $100. At the time, Argentina was a little more expensive than it is now. And so once the money started running out, we'd got pretty much through Patagonia. The original idea had been to stay in Patagonia all the way up to Mendoza in Argentina, then cross the Andes into Chile, Santiago. But with the money running out, we were slipping into survival mode. We kind of knew this day was coming. This is, before we began this thing, me and my father had a conversation about how we were going to pull this off without any support, without the cash.
Sure.
And we had decided that if I could make it to the border with the United States, things would change. That was the plan. It was to do whatever I had to do to get through Latin America. And I was quite confident we could do that. And eventually the money was running out, and I had the option of leaving Argentina earlier to get into Chile, because we understood that survival in Chile would be a lot easier than in the deserts of Patagonia. Yeah. It's very difficult to survive in an arid desert environment. You can't find the food and the water you need. On the other side of the Andes, you have the coast, which would be the most preferred area zones to survive. Mm-hmm. And we knew we had green, fertile fields and farmland.
Sure.
So I crossed early from the town of Bariloche in Chile into Ozono in Chile. And almost immediately I picked up on, oh my goodness, how much easier it is. Once you get down over the Andes onto the other side, it's farmland, it's green, it's fertile, and there's stuff growing everywhere. And we literally started living off the land. The money had run out. We were down to being able to buy, maybe a can of Coke or an egg or two a day for a little while. Wow. And I had to supplement everything else from what I could find on the side of the road. Wow. All I had to do was keep the distance daily. And we could do it. We could work it out. And literally in Chile, we started foraging from along the side. And there's stuff growing. There's apple trees, there's orchards. And in the evenings, I would borrow stuff from farms. They had a head of corn here, a head of corn there. And there were a lot of blackberries growing along the side of the road. So a little bit of the day had to be put aside for foraging.
Yeah.
And I also started to learn just how much stuff people threw out of their cars. So if you're wandering all day down the side of the road, you will find food. You will find half a packet of sandwiches, half a liter of Coke, a bag of chips. Wow. There is so much stuff that you don't realize is there until you start to get hungry and you start to look for it.
Everything's starting to look edible.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, look at that.
It does. Yeah, it does. And it's funny. Well, it was interesting to learn what hunger does to you when you actually don't have an option. Like when you don't know where the next meal's coming from. There's a kind of deep paranoia starts to develop. and everything you see looks like food, and it's weird.
I don't think
And
I'd
you
want to
see
be
food
traveling
everywhere.
with you at that point. Good thing you were solo.
Well, there were a couple of there were some crazy moments where I'm trying to catch chickens and even hunting livestock. It got kind of weird and bizarre at times. But the hunger thing, there were some really hungry days. There were some days
Sure.
it didn't quite work out. But that fear, when you don't know where the next meal is going to come from, is interesting. It really does shape your whole. Everything becomes about food, and you see it everywhere. And it was an interesting time. But generally speaking, we could find enough to keep me moving, keep going all the way up through Chile into Santiago. And then in Santiago, we had our first conversation with the press. And that was a huge lesson as well, because the press picked up on this pretty quick. And there was one of the main papers in Santiago, Chile, did it like a Sunday magazine. And they did a big spread on it about this guy literally living on, trash, trying to walk around the world. And after that, once I'd left Santiago, North Santiago, people began stopping in their cars and giving me stuff because they'd read about me.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
They started donating cash. There were individuals on the road in Chile who donated $100 out of their pocket, just out of the blue.
Wow.
I was like, wow, this press thing.
There is some
this
good
meeting
things about that.
is the ticket here. This worked.
Right on.
This really amazing
Yeah,
story.
but things were looking up at that point. And that newspaper article made an absolutely fundamental difference to my quality of life on the road.
Yeah, that's great.
But that was another interesting lesson, because we were going north and we were going back into the deserts. So it was kind of really important that happened.
So I want to bring us up. I'm going to move us forward to there a little bit. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think the next stage, you're going to cross into the Atacama Desert. I think that's where it is. And
Right.
Isn't it one of the driest places on Earth? It's like some places haven't seen rain for like 400 years. It's absolutely crazy. And, I hope you packed extra water and you left your umbrella behind. So what was that like?
Yeah, this is one of those first trying areas. I was quite worried at first, didn't quite know how I was going to do that, how I was going to play out. I mean, we built the beast specifically so it could carry a lot of weight, so not carry a lot of water. We were on the main road, and Chile is a very thin, long country. So you've got one major highway. So all the major traffic is using this one, I think it's Route 5, all the way up through Chile. And we were going to be on Route 5 for the most part there. It wasn't as bad as I imagined, because there was always pockets of civilization. And again, you had the locals chipping in and helping. So, and because it was that one single highway, the major commercial traffic, like the coaches and main truckers, would use that constantly.
Yeah, sure.
And they would see me day after day, week after week, for months.
So you had a little security with that.
So I remember a truck would pass me. You'd be in this desolate, windswept nothingness, and then a truck would pass me, and then you'd see bags being thrown out of the truck cabin as it passed, and they would truck out oranges, bottles of water. So these trucks were just driving past, just lobbing stuff out there for me onto the road as they passed. Just awesome.
Yeah.
Just fantastic.
So, Carl, I've never been in a desert or never crossed one. I just read it in books and see it in movies. So I never really had any first-hand experience. So I just have this notion that it is dry and it's just a vast stretch of sand and nothingness and cold nights. So I just want to know, what were you thinking when you were crossing this desert?
Yeah, no, deserts are some of my favorite places. They're awesome. They're amazing. Yeah, no, I love the deserts. I think, it's that vast sense of freedom. In heavily populated areas, it's difficult sometimes when you have to pitch tent every night somewhere different and you don't know where you're going to go. Yeah. And animals, they're not really the problem. The most dangerous animal out there are human beings, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree.
Right.
And being an ex-soldier, you tend to look at the world through that threat analysis filter. So I'm always a little more cautious when living on the side of the road. For example, at night, I will always do my best to get off and hide somewhere. I sleep a lot better if I know nobody knows where I am.
Right. Yes.
Great for that because there's nobody around. I mean, well, in populated regions and areas, sometimes it gets a little hairy. It's very difficult, a little awkward. And I think I found, having come up to densely populated areas in Chile, southern Chile, once you get into the north and those big deserts, and that, again, there's a real sense of freedom. Life's pretty easy when it comes to living. It's just the water and food thing. And we were on that main road. That turned out not to be a big issue, I don't think, for the most part. There were a couple of dodgy spots, but for the most part, it was fine. So I love the deserts. I love those deserts. Just amazing sunsets. Some of those evenings out there in the Atacama were just absolutely unforgettable.
All right.
And the isolation as well. Because I remember when you're in the heart of the desert there, and there's a couple of hundred miles between any major towns, that sense of isolation was really interesting. I can see why NASA has a lot of those Mars robots there in the Atacama.
Well, I can imagine, like, when you're talking about you get to places on your trip where you're absolutely broke, I'm sure, and you have no money, and you're hunting for your food. I think the worst place on the planet would be in the middle of a city. You have no money, trying to find a place to sleep. Being in a city with no money has got to be the worst, for sure.
Yes. It gets a lot more complicated.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll touch on that before we cross into the United States as well, because that was a major concern.
Oh, God, yeah. There's frightening places in America where you just don't want to be in the middle of time. We're going to get to that talk about your crossing of America. But anyway, I want to take us to Peru. We moved forward, we're in Peru, and we read somewhere about you were caught in a dust storm. I have never been in a dust storm as well, and curious, like, where does it come out of nowhere when it hits? Are you choking? Are you blinded?
Especially because that part of the world is so windy at times, and even there in the deserts, in the Atacama, I remember there were a couple of occasions where it got really, really nasty. But you get to a point where the visibility starts to drop, and in conditions like that, normally you might get off the side of the road and give it a little while to let it pass. I remember objects coming out of that low visibility at high speed. So things like can lids and things or bottles would just appear and come whipping past you like missile. And you're like, where the hell is this coming from? But it's coming from somewhere. And you could hear things. You could see, metal tin lids come whistling past like a missile.
Wow.
It was weird. Remember that in the Atacama.
How long does usually a sandstorm last?
It's not like some of the storms you'll see in the Sahara or maybe even in Arizona where you see a cloud in front of you, looks like a wall, an opaque wall moving towards you. You don't see it like that. I think these things build gradually. And then it's like when you're in the Arctic where you start to lose ground visibility once the sand starts to move. And the stronger the wind, then the higher that lack of visibility, that ground sand that's been spooled up by the wind will eventually just, lose sight of the sky.
So eventually you forge on and you make your way into Colombia. I think it's somewhere, I'm probably pronouncing, I'm going to bastardize this a bit.
Long way north. Yeah.
So you're getting up into Colombia and you're in, is it Medellin? I'm probably ruining that. And you meet Catalina. And now I can imagine on your journey, you've met a lot of great people. As you said here just recently, just in the first few years, random acts of kindness, lovely people along the way. It's been a big part of your story. This is a story that's happened and you found great people, but I would imagine it's hard as hell to form a relationship because, you're always moving on. We're just curious a little bit about Catalina and how many years? It was 7 years. How did you keep it together for that long?
Well, that was a hell of a story. It was a tough 7 years. And times and circumstances play a big role here too. Meeting Catalina was, one of the highlights of my life, obviously. And ultimately one of the most miserable and brutal times of my life.
Sure.
Um,
Double-edged sword, for sure.
oh, the blood and tears went into that one.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, so I mean, at the time, Colombia was in the midst of its troubles, civil war, virtual civil war with FARC. There was a lot of people leaving Colombia, looking for asylum in other countries, especially in the rest of Latin America and, of course, the US.
Yep.
So Colombians weren't welcome anywhere. But at the time, we couldn't get her to visit me anywhere else in the world. So we really weren't. I had to come off the road and go back to see her. And we were trying like hell to get her to come on the road with me. And that's the way we developed the relationship. But
Yep.
unfortunately, that wasn't working out. So we ended up spending a lot of time apart.
Nearly impossible to get her a visa anywhere, I'm presuming.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
we put up some real battles. And I think we
Yeah.
finally dug in hard in Canada.
Hmm.
And we went all out. So we got a leading immigration lawyer in Canada who decided to work on my behalf pro bono.
Far out,
Um,
far out.
and we-
Another act of kindness. Love that story.
Yes, another major one. He went to Colombia. They put together a massive portfolio, a package. He went to Colombia with her. They both went to the embassy, Canadian embassy, explained the case, explained everything, gave them this, book of work that they'd put together. And the Canadian embassy said, this is the most impressive presentation that's ever been put in front of us. No.
Oh my God. Just
We spent
heartbreaking.
4 months on it. We
Yeah.
spent 4 months putting that together. And then eventually we actually flew Catalina to the UK because you could get in the UK of all
Wow.
places.
Oh, that's amazing.
So she flew to the UK. So her and my father went to the Canadian embassy in the UK and said, look, it's not about this Latina girl just wanting to get out of the country, not wanting to go home. It's not what this is about, which is what everyone thinks it's about. Some Latin girl has attached herself to a white guy to get a visa, yada, yada.
Sure.
They'd never leave
Yeah.
once they're there. And, all of these governments in the Americas are dealing with the expense of all of these asylum cases or all these people, Colombians coming in and then overstaying their visas. So they don't want any part of it. So, yeah, we took her to the embassy there in the UK. Again, no effect. And at that point, we spent what we could, put a lot of time into it. And Catalina was absolutely done with this because she's a professional civil engineer, very proud woman. And she felt that by the end of this, she felt like she was dirt on the bottom of our shoes. Like she'd put up with so much rejection.
Oh, that's
Really
sad.
did feel like a fourth-rate citizen. And this was having the toll on her. Not a couple of years later, it ran its course. Eventually, a Spanish energy company had headhunted her and a couple of others and took them to Spain to be a part of their company. And she would find someone else and someone who could be there rather than not be on the other side of the world, and rest is history.
Yeah, well, you being who you are, you put up a hell of a fight, giving it your best, tried to make it happen, but totally understandable.
Well, hearing that story, I believe that she's an amazing woman, and she stuck with you for this endeavor and everything. So she really must be a really beautiful and amazing woman.
Yeah, well, she's very she's an adult, so she wasn't that crazy. She was a professional woman. Going down this rabbit hole and some of the things that we did to try and get her across those borders. Yeah, that was an experience. Not something I think she'll be doing in the future, but
Sure.
it's tough on her.
Yeah.
So, here you are, you're in Colombia. You got right ahead of you, you have the Darien Gap. The Darien Gap is a lawless
Very interesting.
place of jungle. It is filled with snakes, anti-government guerrillas. It's a crazy place, man. Like, this is the kind of place where you walk in and you don't walk out. How do you cross something like the Darien Gap?
Really, and it starts with Colombia. I mean, it starts with crossing the border from Ecuador into Colombia, because we were going into a hot zone. At the time, Colombia is kidnap central of the world.
Wow.
There are wars raging in Colombia. So you have the Colombian army holds the center of the country, and they're fighting on 60 separate fronts all around the outside of that. So instantly, in the south of Colombia, we have a low-grade left-wing guerrilla group called ELN, who literally make their living out of kidnapping people. So some blonde-haired, blue-eyed gringo wandering down the road was just fair game. I mean, so we expected the worst. And my father, with all the confidence in the world, sent me a professional will form to sign, just to make sure we had all those I's dotted and T's crossed.
And did he make you sign any sort of life insurance agreement?
We had nothing. We had no insurance grinders or anything like that. No, I remember I'm literally a homeless guy at the time. But we made sure that we were ready for the worst. We expected to be robbed a couple of times at least. And it was a very interesting experience. And again, I drifted through Colombia like smoke across a battlefield and interacted with almost nothing. And stuff was happening a day in front or a day behind. So, for example, I would hook up with a bunch of Colombian soldiers on the side of the road that were out doing patrols or whatnot. And I'd spend the evening with them. And then the next day, I would hear that those guys got into a firefight and one of them was killed or something. I remember that happened on one occasion. I remember once reaching a whole kilometers of trucks parked on the side of the road, and it turned out that the day ahead of me there, FARC had a roadblock and had looted and burned all these trucks, kind of thing.
Wow.
So it was happening all around me, and I managed to just wander through Colombia all the way to Medellin without getting myself into any trouble, which was just amazing, I thought. Because there were signs of it everywhere. You can see where there's been fighting, and you can see the graffiti from these various groups, and you constantly feel vulnerable.
Oh, man.
And there was a really interesting story. I'd been in there a couple of days, and I was trying to find a place to sleep. Remember before about when I said I like to hide at night?
Yeah.
Especially in somewhere like Colombia, you want to hide away at night. And I'm having a hard time finding a place this one particular night. And it's getting dark, and I'm still trying to find some dead ground. And I remember climbing a steep bank to try and get onto the top of this ground so that maybe I could put my tent up there and not be seen from the road. And I get to the top and I fall down. So I roll down this hill and end up in a heap of crap at the bottom, just as this motorbike drives past me. And there's these two people on this motorbike looking at me all kind of wide-eyed as they go past me. And I think nothing of it. I crawl back up, and eventually I'm up. I put my tent up. And not long after I did, there was a torchlight hits the side of the tent. And I'm like, oh, now what?
Oh.
So I unzip the tent and I poke my head out, wondering who it is. And I'm confronted with two people in ski masks carrying M16.
Oh, my God.
And they see me poke my head out of the tent, and immediately they start screaming at me.
And
I'm
you
like,
can't understand them. You have no idea
No.
what they're saying, I'm guessing.
My Spanish is not there. I've got a little, enough to know that they're saying, get out of the tent, get out of the tent. And I'm thinking, shit, I've been here a couple of days and here we are, right? This is where we imagined we were going to be at some point.
Yeah.
So they're yelling and screaming, and there's two of them, and one of them's a woman. They're in civilian clothes and ski masks. And I come out of the tent, hands on my head, and I'm on my knees in front of the tent. And one of them is coming around slowly, trying to get a look inside of the tent, and they want to know who else is with me. Specifically, that's what they're asking me, and I'm screaming, "No, I'm alone."
Which they
I'm
probably
English.
can't believe. Like, who does this alone?
Right, not a common thing
Right.
in Colombia at this time. So eventually, they come around, they figure it out. They're on a radio, and then all around me, from the bushes and trees, there are these army and police just appear. And what had happened is I'd put my tent, I think, very close to an airfield, which was heavily defended, a sensitive point that I had known about. And those individuals on the motorcycle had reported me, and the army had thought FARC was moving on that location, as you would.
You've been in
And
security
so
zone,
they'd mobilized. So there were a large detachment of troops and police had gone out looking for a fight. And these two individuals had been sent forward as a recon And once they figured out what was going on, once all these guys appeared, realized who I was and what was going on, but they all cracked open flasks of booze. So we were drinking some hardcore liquor, and everyone was in a jovial
party. I love it.
There wasn't going to be any blood and bullets that night.
Another one of those random acts of kindness.
Totally out of the movies, I can say that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, man.
It was nuts.
Yeah.
And there was that palpable feeling of relief.
Oh yeah.
All the guys.
I'm feeling it.
From the firearms to booze. Oh.
Yeah, and it was just crazy. And that was like maybe the second or third day in Colombia, I think, something like that. I'd been in there just a few days. So that was a really interesting encounter. It goes to show how sensitive things were. And after that, like I said, I hung out with troops quite a lot. I hung out with the troops wherever possible because I felt obviously a lot safer around those guys. Although I don't know if necessarily that is the case.
Yeah.
But that would take me all the way into Medellin. And then, of course, once in Medellin, you're looking at the Darien Gap, which is the first of 3 linchpins that made the whole journey possible. So there were these 3 gaps.
Right.
There was the Darien Gap, there was the Bering Strait, and then eventually the Channel Tunnel. And all 3 of these linked all the continents and linked the route together. So now we were facing the Darien Gap, which is that first real controversial linchpin. So Medellin was where we would hunker down for a couple of months to work this out. And the way we would do this was naturally, me and my father were ex-military. Father was ex-special forces and I'm an ex-paratrooper. So for us, this was going to be an escape and an evasion exercise. We were going to have to creep through the Darien Gap.
So you had a bit of a game plan here. Really military oriented, like it's a mission.
A real mission. Yeah. And people were dying.
Right.
And there were lots of horror stories of the Canadian backpacker who went in there, and then eventually his body was found full of bullet holes. There was a Russian cyclist stopped by FARC on that road that we had to use to get to the Darien Gap, and they just put a bullet in his head on the side of the road. And these are left-wing guerrillas. And before I arrived there, 2 British botanists had gone into the Darien Gap looking for rare orchids 9 months prior and had disappeared and were never seen again and were soon dead.
Yeah.
And so my first task in Medellin was to connect with as many people that could give me as much information about the Darien Gap. So we started talking to the army, the police, the local media, and people who had worked or lived in that area. And we basically started putting together a plan based on all the information that we could gather. And we had some pretty interesting encounters. For example, so Catalina was helping me at this time. I remember we went to the police HQ at one point for the region that encompasses, including the Darien Gap region. And they left me standing in a corridor one day. And I was skinny at this point with long hair, all disheveled.
Speaking of you, long hair and blonde hair, blue-eyed gringo, I'd like to pull up this picture. I love this picture, by the way. And I read this is where Catalina disguised you as a drifter, dyed your hair. And man, when I look at this picture, I pull that up, Maddie. This is 2A. Pull up 2A, please. Can you see that shot on your side?
I can, yeah.
Oh my God, dude! I don't think I'd allow you in my house.
Which was the point. I mean, that was the whole point of this. Because phase 1, what we'd learned from everybody that we'd spoken to, was that if you're going to go down this road to get to the Darien Gap, was a heavily contested road that was being fought for by FARC and by the right-wing paramilitaries and by the army. So various factions held parts of this road. And the army were very blunt. Like, they were like, look, nobody goes down that road without you being watched. You're going to be seen. Everyone's going to be there. So phase 1 was, well, let's just dumb down my appearance. You can't go in there looking like a tourist. You're going to have to make it look like you're not worth anything to anyone.
Right.
And the only thing they're going to get from you is going to be ticks and fleas.
I get it, man.
And then they might not be as interested in kidnapping you.
No money in the pocket. The guy's actually scavenging for food. He's homeless.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was the idea, and we tried to dumb down the whole blonde hair thing. Did our best. Even dyed my skin as well at this point. So we went the full Monty. We even tried to get contact lenses. We were looking for brown contact lenses.
Yeah, the brown contact lenses.
But then realized trying to find brown contact lenses in Latin America, there wasn't a great
Nearly
deal
impossible.
of
Yeah, who needs those?
They wanted blue, yeah.
So they weren't very common and popular at that point. So we had to just run with the whole blue eye thing. But I mean, and I think it had a limited effect. People still paid a lot of attention to me because no matter what I do, I'm clearly not local, and disguise is not something new for this part of the world. The Darien Gap in particular, which was such of interest to so many angles. I mean, you've not just the drug war, but the war in Colombia. But there was so much going on in there, and this is what people were telling me. You've got everything in there. You've got DEA, you've got CIA, you've got all the drug lords, and because you've got the cocaine plantations in those jungles being looked after by the guerrillas. That's how the guerrillas were making their money.
Yep.
And looking after from the cartels, and all this various conflict. I mean, it was just an absolute mess. And it was lawless. The police can't get into that jungle. Working with my father, we'd split this into a couple of phases. So first phase, we had to get through the rest of Colombia along the road to get to the point where we break off that road and head for the jungle.
Okay.
And there was a river in the way,
Yep.
a big ass river, 1 kilometer wide in parts, called the Atrato. And either side of that river was like 40 miles of swamps, like the Everglades, these jungles. And then eventually there was the jungle itself into the border with Panama, and then out into Panama. So we split it into these various phases, and each would have its own characteristics. So the road phase, we did the whole disguise thing. And then eventually, once we got to break off that road, we would ditch the disguise and go into what we termed jungle mode. Jungle mode was basically designed so if we got into trouble in the jungle, we layered. All this is what soldiers do when you're working behind enemy lines, for example. So we had kind of layers of protection. So the backpack had a certain amount of gear in. And then what we'd done, we'd got these Colombian combat vests so that I could put some of my more important survival equipment in that vest and keep it close to me. So if I have to do a runner in the jungle, I can ditch the backpack.
Okay.
Because the backpack will get caught and slow you down.
Yeah.
So you want to get rid of the backpack first and foremost and run like a freaking rabbit through the undergrowth with what you've got on you. Now, if I'm captured and they take everything off of me except the clothes I'm standing in, we had basically hidden escape, survival, and navigation stuff into the clothing. So it was sewn into seams, into double layers of fabric, and if you pat me down, you can't feel this stuff. So within my clothing there was money, some medication, a fishing kit, wire saws, all the survival stuff, snares, and even in the back of my jacket, all along the back of my jacket was a cloth map that we'd made, sewn into the material.
Go gadget, man! You got the shit sewn
and money.
everywhere.
So we had money, dollars sewn into the clothing as well. So if I managed to escape and do a runner with nothing more than what I'm standing in, then I have the basics with me.
Yeah.
So that's how we layered that. That was the jungle mode. Always looking at worst case scenarios. We had the option of carrying guns as well, but that would have been a serious mistake.
Yeah.
Because if you end up facing a FARC patrol armed with RPGs and heavy automatic weapons, and a shotgun means you're just going to die really, really quick. So you don't want a gun. The idea was that we'd basically have to talk our way out of any situation we would find ourselves in. And before we set off, we got the added hope, because remember we talked about the 2 botanists that gone into the jungle.
That's right, the 2 that never came back.
Well, just before Christmas, they reappeared. FARC had held them, hadn't told anybody, and then let them go. And so that was a positive note. And it was funny because they let the guys go. The guys kind of went off into the jungle, realized they had no idea where they were going, and then went back to their captives to ask them for a map asking how to get out because it wasn't doing them any good.
So there you go, another random act of kindness. I love these guys. I don't know, these guys are obviously crazy. I would never go back to some place where they held me.
So this is really how desperate they are. They have to go back to their captives.
It was interesting. A couple of things to note was, first of all, that the FARC, you really don't know how it's going to go. It can go either way. Like literally, they'll execute people on the spot. And other times, they'll just lock you over and not batter an eyelid. So you have no idea how it's going to go. Really hard to plan for situations like that. But of course, this gave us a little bit of hope. And that was the approach that we took. So once we got off the road, we went into jungle phase, which was a relief to get rid of that silly disguise. And then we faced the actual jungle itself. And the first couple of attempts to get into that jungle, we couldn't find a way in. And then I had to backtrack to a small village that was occupied by the Colombian army and the right-wing paramilitaries. So there were three main factions fighting each other. And you're right on the front line. You are now right on the front line of the fighting. The Colombians, the Colombian, the FARC guerrillas own everything out that way, and the army and the right-wing paramilitaries own everything on this side of the line. It's a complicated mix, as these things always are. And it was interesting to see how in this town, the military and the right-wing paramilitaries, who were supposed to be fighting one another, were actually working together as a team. I arrived there and I had to get permission from the leader of the right-wing paramilitaries to be there and to get permission to go down what was one track, 60 kilometers long, to get to this river. And it was the only option that we had to get through this just dense, thick undergrowth and swamp. And the problem is that FARC held that track. At the bottom of that track, there is the small town on the river called Rio Sucio. So I got these two towns and this track between them. The two towns have been held by the army and the right-wing paramilitaries, but FARC has that track. So it was a really interesting conversation with the right-wing paramilitary boss, and he was blunt, and he was like, "Look, nobody goes down that track." And he was like, "Gringo, if they catch you on that track, they won't shoot you because the noise of the gun will give away their position. They'll put you under the knife." So it was one of those days that you don't tend to forget, because it was, sure. And I remember they took me to the track. They took me to the track, and we were having this conversation, and it was like, "You can go down that track, but just be aware that what you're walking into right now." And I think throughout this entire, this entire expedition, long before, I think we'd made up our minds that we would face that track one day. Mm-hmm. And this was really now game time. Wow. So yeah, no, I'm going down that track. And he was like, "Whatever, away you go, good luck." And as I'm leaving, I'm passing soldiers in trenches, literally defensive positions, all guns pointing outwards. And they're all looking at me, thinking, "Wait, where were you going, you dickhead?"
This is crazy guy doing.
They're wondering what they're doing. They're going, "This guy's out here just cruising."
They jump out of the trenches. They come running up, like, whoa. This ain't you ain't going touring down this track. And I'm like, "Yeah, I get it, I know." But anyway, they wouldn't let me go, and they took me to see their boss. So I'm speaking to the commander, and I spend the night with him there. He has to get permission. So he basically talks to his higher command to be able to let me go. And eventually the word comes back, and they're like, "Okay, we can't stop you from going down that track, but we first of all need a few things from you." So we had to do a conversation, an interview with a dictaphone. Mm-hmm. And he was saying, "Look, I've explained to you the situation. It is your choice, and you're the one making it right." And I had to agree and say, "Yes, it's me. My name is Karl Bushby. I am agreeing. You have told me everything.
I am in sound mind." They're finding out you're crazy.
I am not drunk. And then I had to sign paperwork to the same effect. Yeah. So we had to get all that out of the way, and then they'd let me go down that track. So a little nervous going down that track. Real world situation now. You're getting yourself so far into this rabbit hole now. It was to get even more tense. Halfway down that track, so it was a 2-day trip for me. So halfway down that track, I got out into the jungle. So I'm about 10 meters from the track or something, 10 feet from the track. And of course, we're playing the game. There's no light, there's no sound. Eat cold food, right? You don't want anybody to know you're there. If I was a civilian group, we might have been doing things differently.
Party on, drinking beer.
You're going to get yourselves in trouble. So, playing this tactical game was working. And not so long, just before last light, so as it's just getting dark, I hear a noise that sounds like horses coming down the track. And then next thing I know, I can see out through the bushes, and there's a couple of patches of blue sky, dark blue, and I can actually start to see silhouettes past me. And as a soldier, the sound of guns, that metal sound. And I started counting, and there was like 20 armed guys past me that night. And as far as anyone is concerned, it was FARC who have that track. So real pucker factor stuff. And it got worse because the next morning, I have to get on that track and I have to go the same direction that they went.
You're gonna follow your enemy.
So, and as an ex-soldier who's done, who knows what it is to fight in the jungle, I know that, you put ambushes on these tracks. That's generally how it works. You patrol and you put ambushes in. So I don't know what I'm walking into. And in a jungle environment, it's the one who can fire first and fire the most ammunition gets to ask the questions afterwards. That's how it works. There's just no messing about. It's lots of bullets, really fast. So I'm really freaking out at this point. And I distinctly remember the birds. So you have these birds that make these alarm calls that you don't normally pay much attention to. But the birds that morning were like deafening foghorns, screaming at me, giving away my position, telling everybody that I'm on that track. I'm freaking out.
Here comes Karl.
I'm freaking out.
Here comes Karl.
So, so the birds were really just annoying as hell. I mean, they were really doing my head in. And the track was hard. At times, it almost disappeared because within the jungles, because of the fighting, the indigenous people have been moved out. So what tracks there are generally overgrown. And I had to climb trees and try and figure out where the faint line is, so I could stick on this track. And then eventually I would get to Rio Sucio and find the fortifications of the troops in that part of the world. And it was really interesting getting there. I arrived kind of mumbling, and I was pretty bad at the time. I was pretty dehydrated at that point as well. So I was pretty ill. And I remember, trying to point down the track saying, like, FARC's out there. And they're like, yeah, we know. We're here for a reason, JK. But it was, again, a jubilant atmosphere that I'd got down that track and made it to these fortifications with these troops, these Colombian troops. And I'd spent a couple of days with them, which was fairly nerve-wracking because those fortifications weren't much at all. And I'd seen the enemy right out there. And at night, I had a real hard time sleeping because there were just big gaps in this so-called defensive position. And I kept having these like semi-nightmares of people sneaking in and stabbing me in my sleep as they try and take this place. And it was surreal. To be on the front lines in a situation like that in that part of the world was a real interesting time, especially as an ex-soldier as well.
Well, I bet it was. I read somewhere, Karl, there's a point in this journey in your crossing where you're floating down the river. On your back, you've stuffed your suit, your shirt with pop bottles, making way down the river with bamboo and weeds and wood over the top of you. You're camouflaged this is a scene out of Rambo, how you're getting through there. And to me, honestly, you make the Navy SEALs look soft. And I say that because you're totally unassisted. You don't have any backup to call. And you're just pulling everything out of the hat that, is this real?
Well, again, the river, because the river comes next. So in Rio Sucio, I'm on the river. So now I'm faced with X number of miles down this river, which is about a 4-day journey. And of course, again, it's just a river crossing, really. So in the Army, river crossing is commonplace. You equipment, a flotation bundle, and then you paddle across the river. So what we were going to do, right? I mean, that's all it was, except this was a long, extended river crossing for about 4 days. Because luckily, we had the current taking us, getting us into an area where you could get beyond the actual swamps, where the ground was high enough to get out of the river system into the Darien Gap. But the problem with the rivers in jungles In jungles, the rivers are the highways of the jungles. These are the road systems of the jungle. So everybody is using the rivers, friend and foe alike. So if you're going to be in the river, and if you get caught in the river, there's no escape. We, of course, had to camouflage myself in the river. And the good news was, in the jungle rivers, they have a lot of vegetation just floating in patches down these rivers.
Yeah, we've seen it.
Mangoes, you know. So I could camouflage myself, get out into amongst that stuff, and then just go with the flow.
Right.
Very simple plan. The easiest distance I had ever done. You've got to get out. At night, you've got to get out into the jungle and throw up your hammock, and that's the only way of doing that.
Yeah.
But it was a really, really interesting journey because you're mixing it with the crocodiles and things.
Oh my God.
You're kind of living with the crocs there for a while, and there's people passing you, military patrol boats and stuff. I got caught twice. I got spotted by locals twice. And the first time was interesting. As you're drifting down this river, quite a ways out onto the shore, there's a small village, just kind of thatched buildings and stuff. These are native indigenous people. And but you don't know who they're aligned with at the time. So the plan is try and avoid everybody. And as I'm drifting past, just watching the kids and things on the edge of the village, I've got, like you say, I have this combat vest. And in the combat vest are these empty bottles that basically makes the vest a life jacket.
Sure.
But to help with that, I've got these two 2-liter Coke bottles stuck down inside between me and the vest. And one of them kind of wiggled its way out and kind of popped out. And it pops and it just lands out of reach, which throws off my balance right now. Everything comes loose. So I'm in the water, like trying to get this bottle back, and I'm kind of in the water, kind of rotating, not behind my backpack. Anyway, so I get this thing back in and I stabilize myself again. And I look back at the village and I'm seeing all the children running along the banks. And I'm like, shit. I'm like, did they see me? And I'm watching and they run to all these guys on those canoes, on these wooden canoes. And then all of a sudden, all the people start running to the canoes, and I'm like, man, well, that, you know. And then all the canoes start coming out, so they see me in the water. So there's nothing you can do. I'm just waiting for these people to arrive, and I've got no idea who they are, who they're going to be working for. And I've got a little while before they get to me, and as I get closer, the boat hooks come out, and then they pull up, and everyone's just trying to grab me, and they're just trying to get me in the boat, right? They're basically rescuing someone in the water.
Yeah, they think you're drowning.
So they're fighting to get me out. I'm fighting to stay in. And the most confusing conversation...
I'm okay, really.
Well, at one point, everyone's like, wait, what is going on? What is going on? And you can see the confusion.
This guy doesn't want
faces. I'm like, no. So they're all standing in these canoes, just looking at me, looking at one another. And it's bizarre. And you can see the confusion on their faces. They've just found a white guy floating down this jungle river, and he's like, no, I want to stay there, thank you very much, have a good day, guys. And then they just sit and they're standing in these canoes just watching me drift away.
Oh my God.
The most bizarre moment.
Wow.
And I was lucky, you know, they didn't.
So they left you?
And they just watched me float away.
Yeah, look at her, let him go. We don't need that.
Wow, Karl.
Cheerio.
You know,
float off down this river. There was another time where something like that, where I was trying to crawl out of the bank at the end of the day, and I couldn't get up this mud bank, and then a couple of out of the reeds, a couple of indigenous people in the dugout canoe just kind of came paddling past, and they looked at me just like the guys on the motorcycle in Colombia earlier, and they went past, and then I got up, I put up the hammock, and then not long after that I heard people looking for me in the jungle. And again, you don't know what's going on, but they're cutting their way into the jungle, they're yelling, they're screaming, there's a line of people. So I go out to meet them, and they take me back to this little village. And again, they're just overwhelmingly, all of these guys were actually working for the right-wing paramilitaries, which worked for me. I'd met the right-wing paramilitaries a couple of times before we got to the jungle itself, another couple of interesting encounters that we skipped over. So they didn't have a problem with a gringo, and these people didn't. And they made me stay in the village with them that night. And the next day, packed my kit back into the river. But yeah, that was the 2 times that they caught me in the river.
Let me step in here for a second, pause for a minute. We've got a lot of ground to cover. So let's get you
Exciting.
Let's get you through the Darien Gap. One last question here. How many days did it take you to get through the Darien Gap?
Well, the Darien Gap was, for me, it was from Medellin to Panama City, and that took 2 months. Within that, so the Darien Gap itself is a couple hundred miles. I mean, to get from the river, once we actually managed to get out of that river and find ground that I could actually stand on, it took 10 days to get something like 30 kilometers. What would take me a day on the road, it would take me 10 days to get through that jungle. It was absolutely brutal.
Wow.
And I'm suffering at this point from a real bad case of diphtheria and diarrhea. My food ran out. I ended up living off fish and coconuts. I remember getting to the border. The GPS is telling me I'm on the border with Colombia, Panama. And I remember sitting down and sobbing like a child.
Oh my God.
For a good number of minutes, because I was absolutely destroyed.
Was
Psychologically
that sobbing out of like I'm almost broken, or I'm in complete joy? I fucking made it.
I mean, emotionally, it would have been a mix, right?
Yeah.
You've reached a point, a significant point. You've hit the border. You've got through Colombia, but I think at that point I was so. I mean, not just the disease side because of the diarrhea and the dehydration and all that kind of stuff.
Probably
taking
nearly
its
killed
toll,
you.
but the workload in that jungle, it was phenomenal. I mean, the Darien Gap it was such, because you can't use tracks. There weren't any real tracks there anyway, but the way you can't use them, because that's how you get captured. So you had to really just punch a hole through this brutal jungle.
Oh my God.
And you suffer from terrain shock, where kind of claustrophobia, because it's so dense. Like when you can bend down, if you turn around, you stand up, you have no idea where you came from or what direction you're going in. You literally had to work from a compass. And the good news was, because it's what you call secondary jungle. The Amazon is primary jungle. And primary jungle is where you have these dense canopies, dense high canopies that stop a lot of light getting into the jungle.
Sure.
So the forest floor is actually a lot easier to maneuver through. Secondary jungle, you don't have that canopy. It's just thick, dense bush.
Oh my God.
And it's just like spending all day long fighting through rose patches. And it's absolutely exhausting. And it really just do a number on you. And so reaching Panama was fantastic. Eventually I found the first village in Panama, which was a real relief. And this was the Cuna Indians. It was this one village, Paya. Yeah, I remember the relief of getting out of Colombia. At this point, you're still in the danger zone because you know that they exist in Panama, on the Panamanian side. And I remember stopping and sitting down and watching the village for a while, just making sure that there was nobody in there.
You're still feeling a bit apprehensive about what can happen, even though you're...
No, you're not safe.
Yeah.
You're not safe. You're a lot happier. I spent a day or two with these guys. And then once you're in Panama, there is a path, a track between that village and the next village. Beautiful track. Get to the next village. These villages are beautiful, so well maintained.
Yeah.
And I think for the first time, I'm starting to see the jungle. I'm starting to experience the jungle. Because everything before that point had just been about survival and just the effort. I was starting to relax.
Yeah.
Oh, you're in one of the most amazing, pristine jungles. The Darien Gap is the only place where within that jungle, there was no sign whatsoever of human beings. No Coke can lids, not a fag butt somewhere. There is no trash. There is nothing. There is no sign of humanity at all. The only place in the world I have been where you will find that. It's a pristine jungle. Even more so because of the conflict that kicked everyone out of there.
Sure.
The indigenous people. So absolutely an amazingly beautiful place. And now on the other side, back in the rivers. So I'm floating down rivers, like almost down rapids on my equipment, or walking in shallow rivers, having a wonderful time. I'm really enjoying myself. And then eventually we get to the first substantial village where you'll find Latinos.
All that I've read about that area of the world, while we're here now, I just want to bam, give you a high five, brother. Congratulations. You made it through the Darien Gap.
Yeah.
And this is a time, like, it's quite different. What year was that again?
So this is 2000.
Yeah. Amazing story, and totally unsupported.
Yeah.
Unreal.
Like, just listening to you, That was really like mind blowing.
Just thinking about like, okay, we're gonna sleep at night. You know, I know the jungle. We live in a lot of jungle area, and Jenna and I have done a lot of jungle trekking, and so even in the middle of the night, you know, depending upon where you sleep, you can wake up in the morning and be covered in ants. You know, like there's so many different factors in a jungle.
Ants and termites just dominated that jungle. Your life was just hell because of these things.
Yeah.
And you had to take a lot of precautions. And it's bizarre. The hammock thing, I had to use Vaseline on either end of the hooks to make it, because at night they would get in there, right? And every day I'd put my backpack under the tent on the floor, and every damn day in that jungle, you would lift it up, and the termite, it would either be ants or termites, but one of them has built Los Angeles underneath your backpack. Right. They've moved in.
That place is alive, man.
There's a colony, and you would spend the first half an hour beating that backpack and getting rid of all the ants and termites that were now had moved into your backpack, and everything in that jungle was just crawling, just
it's amazing. You know, even our little village here, we're kind of a jungle area. You can leave a backpack or you can leave a bag. We have a lot of stuff. A couple days later, you go in, you just open it up and you're like, oh my God, it's an ant farm inside my personal stuff. That happens every day.
It was the full combo in this particular case. The geopolitical, the threat, the environment was as tough as it gets.
So I reckon after
we haven't finished. Because now I'm going and I crawl out of the river into Boca de Cuba, and I come through a banana plantation, and I step, and I come across a hut with a sandbag wall and a machine gun, a belt-fed machine gun on it. And I'm momentarily confused. And I'm like, whoa. And so I step around the side, and then I come face to face with a guy in a green uniform, an AK-47. And shit hits the fan. Oh. And I'm standing in a green uniform.
This is in Panama.
With a combat vest, right? And he looks up, he sees me, and he's, eyes grow wide, the gun comes up, and he's basically screaming at me, who are you? And I'm thinking, and I'm trying to work out what's going on. And the only people I know that have these green uniforms, AK-47s, is Spark. So at the point where I'm at my most relaxed, I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. So he's screaming, who are you? And I'm screaming, who are you, back at him. And we have this ridiculous conversation. Who are you? Who are you? Who are you?
Yeah.
Who are you?
Who are you?
Going on. And behind him, there's guys running. And that's it. We're just yelling at each other. Who are you? I've got my hands in the air, and there's guys running about. And what I'd done is I'd stumbled into this position. Oh, and I figured it out. I started working in my mind, because next to the machine gun, there's a Kevlar helmet. And I know that FARC don't use Kevlar helmets.
This is high tech.
And then behind him, there's a makeshift walking line with a bunch of T-shirts, black T-shirts. And on one of those T-shirts, it's written, Policia de Frontera de Panama. Uh-huh. And so it dawns on me that this is the Panamanian police. With that, I'm like, thank God. They still don't know who I am at this point. But I start to relax, because the Panamanians don't have an army. The police does that job. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't just aware just how bad things were on that side of the border. So basically, FARC come in, they raid the villages, steal food and drugs and everything. So this is the front line in Panama fighting the guerrillas. So there's a really tense standoff. They figure out who I am eventually. They take me to meet the boss. The boss everybody calms down, he's happy, the good old days again. And then they say, we've got somewhere for you to sleep. They put me in this building, basically a cell, close the door and lock it behind me. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? So now everyone's very suspicious. So eventually they put me in this helicopter, and I'm protesting quite loudly. The aircraft springs a fuel leak on the way, and we have to land in Yavitsa. They get me off the helicopter. We go into a police station in Yavitsa. This was one of my target locations, where the first road starts out of the Darien Gap. And then they throw me in with a couple of Colombians. Now I'm being treated like a prisoner, basically. So I have my shoelaces removed from my boots, all my equipment taken off of me, and I'm put on a truck, and we're taken inland, and I get taken to a compound. We are debussed with other illegal immigrants. I found myself in a compound with illegal immigrants being filed in and out of interviews. And the police want to know who I am, what I'm doing with these Colombians. I'm like, I'm not with the Colombians. You put me with the Colombians. And we have these really interesting conversations. Then I go to another cell. They won't let me talk to anybody. They won't let me communicate. I'm not allowed to talk to somebody until I've spoken to AKA the boss. So I have, no communication with anybody outside. And a couple of days later, this guy turns up at the bars of this cell, and he wants to speak to the gringo. And we start a conversation. And it turns out that he is, in fact, he's the intelligence officer for that part. He's the Panamanian intelligence officer. And he knows I got a GPS, military background, so he wants to talk. He takes me out of the cell, sits me down in an office with a map, and he starts asking me questions. Immediately, I catch on to the information that he wants. So I'm like, okay, get me a red pen, a blue pen, a black pen, and let me have it at this map. Because throughout the entire time in this journey, ever since Medellin, as an ex-soldier, I have been living with soldiers. I've lived with the right-wing paramilitaries. I've seen I've talked to them, I've asked them questions. They tell me things they shouldn't tell me.
Right.
And I've basically just took notes.
You became an
so when
intelligence
it comes to the Colombian
officer.
Army,
Is that how I'm taking it?
You
became like an inside intelligence officer for the
So
Panamanians.
basically, I picked up all this information.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely, absolutely. I put down everything down on this map. I put down where the positions were, the size of the units, turnaround times of the units, where the paramilitaries had their radio base, the areas they patrolled. I could tell you their discipline standards, their defensive, the weapons, their radios. All of it to me was just interesting. This guy was just freaking out. This was a gold mine.
Yeah,
he just got so excited. And then he was like ordering people. He was like, "What do you want to eat? What do you want? Anything.
Yeah, you've got a free meal here, buddy.
Food.
You just saved our day.
So I started this relationship with this intelligence. Eventually, they took me to another big jail. And then eventually, one day in this cell, and there was another crazy story as well about this jail. And then one day, this officer, he visited the jail. He saw me in the jail and kind of went nuts and said, "No, get him out of there." And they took me out of the jail and put me in the police canteen, and I had to stay there. And altogether, we're looking about 18 days until eventually they got me out.
Yeah, but you're getting
and let me carry on. And then they let me go. So then I had to go back into the jungle and spend a couple of days making my way back out to Boca de Cooper, get the police chief to sign paperwork to say that I went back to the point where I stopped, turn around and come back out of the jungle for the next couple of days, and then eventually back to Ibiza and on the road. Wow. So just the whole drama of getting that last couple of stretches there out of the jungle was some fun.
Wasn't that easy. You thought you had it, and then it gets a bit difficult. Wow. Incredible story. Karl, we've got a lot to cover here. I mean, we're walking around the world, brother. This is a long journey.
Well, yeah, the Darien Gap, it is really mind-blowing story. Yeah. So, okay, we're moving forward, Karl.
Let's bring us up to. We're gonna bring it all the way across the tundra, the desert. I think you went through the Mojave. You got to
Yeah, to the Mojave Desert, and we have read it as a beautiful and as a hunting landscape. So, how was that for you?
This one was about heat. This was all about the heat.
Right.
I was in the hottest place, just about the hottest place in the world at the hottest time of the year, and that had a huge impact. That's when I had to switch to walking at nights, but couldn't do that because you can't sleep during the day.
Right.
There was, it got to a point in Arizona there where it was nosebleeds and fainting.
I never really thought of that angle. So you're really having a difficult time. The heat stops you in so many angles. I never really thought of that. So what's happening is you're hiking at night, but during the day it's so hot you can't sleep.
So what you do is you start walking late at night until you get a couple of hours sleep in the dark, and then you'll do the early mornings until about 9-10 o'clock in the morning if possible. And then throughout the day, you just have to find somewhere to get out of the sun And the only place you could do that were culverts under the road. So you end up living like a mole rat for the most of it.
Oh,
this is like,
the round tunnels where the water can flow through. Is that what you're saying? Culverts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Culverts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, they were great. Yeah. Throughout most of the journey throughout.
You're the only guy I know who loves those.
Again, in Asia, culverts would be
incredible.
Culverts. Oh man, like some serious real estate in these culverts.
Okay.
You know,
that's really a good
maybe we
attitude.
can start selling those. Real estate. That's incredible. How many days did that crossing take you until you really got out of that zone? I mean, there's a few miles across there.
Oh, that lasted. That's probably a few months. I think, up into Vegas, and then out of Vegas up until eventually in Utah. We've been through the summer. It's autumn. So leaving up into the Utah there in autumn, things get green and it starts to cool off. That was quite a journey there. I love that part of the world.
Yeah,
Arizona.
I reckon you had a bit. I've seen that you've been across the states now a couple times, and I grew up there. And lovely, lovely land, incredible territory. I grew up as a climber and an outdoor adventurer. Eventually moved on to sailing, but I lived out of the back of my car, and I've been in every state in the United States, and it's just a beautiful place. So I can imagine that you had a great time there, and probably a hell of a lot of partying as well along the way.
One of my favorites.
Yeah. So you make it across the states, long journey, beautiful. You're going to move in. I just can't even imagine this walk across Canada, the tundra, and just that journey alone. I've driven the Pan American Highway all the way up to Alaska, and that was painful.
And you're in a car.
I was in a car, man, so I can't imagine this journey at all. Phenomenal.
Yeah, this was the first. This after the heat, after meeting the heat in North America, this was the first time I met the cold. Because I would do this during the winter. So the Alaskan highway during the winter gets down to -40, and it was pretty brutal.
Savage.
Yeah, it was rough.
Cars that do that route don't shut the truck off. They leave it running, continue, because if the fear is if they shut it off, they won't be able to start it again. And the batteries, the cold just sucks the batteries, so they usually just leave their rigs running continually. I imagine, Karl, you had a lot of people in some areas as well who stopped and tried to pick you up, because the law in a lot of, at least I know in Alaska, a lot of laws like Fairbanks, for example, I'm sure you went through Fairbanks, you're required by law, if you find someone in the middle of the cold, you have to pick them up, because it's a chance they're going to die.
Yeah.
Right?
No, you get that everywhere, all the time. You get it everywhere, all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And did you have a hard time explaining to them? Like, no, don't save me.
No,
you had to do most of that
stuff.
You couldn't do that in the winter. Was it possible to do that in the winter? Were you doing that in the winter?
Yeah.
Wow. It's insane.
Oh yeah. I mean, just the first of many years to come of that.
It's getting crazier. It's
Absolutely.
Going
yeah. It's just warm up.
It's just a warm up.
Okay, this stuff. I grew up in that sort of environment, and I know it very well. And as you know, Janet's been on top of Everest, and she's experienced cold.
Yeah.
I know.
So you've probably done it to a whole different degree than us. And one of the things that struck me when I looked at, you made it to Wales, Alaska. I think that was in 2006. And what really caught me is that, there's more roads in Rhode Island than there are in Alaska. Alaska is 550 times larger than Rhode Island. There's absolutely no roads in Alaska. And I was thinking, before you cross the Bering Straits, I was like, how the hell did you even get to Wales?
Well, this was Fairbanks, Alaska was the end of the road.
Right, okay.
So once we got there, everything changed. All the equipment, everything. We arrived in May. We looked at the possibility of a summer route across Alaska. It became so complicated and so long because you had to kind of, a really funny route to get around. We decided we can't do summer, just don't have the logistics to be able to do that. So we decided to wait until winter. winter gives us the most direct route, because then in winter in this part of the world, again, the rivers are the highways. So anything that travels on those rivers, frozen rivers. So that's what we decided to do. So we've got a good number of months to hunker down. I go back to see Catalina.
Okay.
Because we've got to play the visa game as well here.
Get all warmed up.
And eventually, yeah, we start off early December, mid-December-ish, I think. We start off across Alaska, pulling a big sled with way too much weight. And I spend 4 months getting across the interior of Alaska, and I get an ass whooping. I get an absolute ass whooping. I am such a novice.
Yeah. Well,
it's funny because I'd interacted so much with the community in Fairbanks, and all
you're
the
headed,
advice I'd had, I should have listened to. And it was tough, man. It was brutal. I think the coldest it got down to on the interior was -51. That's still, and it was just brutal because the snow it was too early in the winter. Here's the rule for the Arctic. Here's the rule for the Arctic. You never travel in early winter. You only travel in late winter. The difference
things are getting better
in the environment is significant. Early winter, deep, soft snow, movement is almost impossible. Late winter, it becomes compact, hardened.
Is this a mistake you made? Is this an experience that you learned firsthand? Like you actually started in early winter. You had to learn this.
Yeah, wow. It was a mistake. I was just keen to get going. We've been waiting for months, had to get it going. I should have waited until later on, at least into February.
Right.
We will learn it the hard way.
And I did, and it was a hard lesson learned to get across.
But that changed your whole life on the way ahead, through the tundra and, the stuff in Russia and stuff like that. So you had to learn it somewhere.
Baptism of fire for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was rough.
Yeah.
And we learned, like I said, I learned a lot. And then I reached the coast of Alaska, and then my visa was running out, so I had to leave. And then we had to pick it up the following winter. So now what we start to see is big gaps in between what we're doing, because now we're becoming dependent on season. Luckily, summers don't last very long in that part of the world. I'd met a guy called Dimitri Kiefer, a French-American guy,
right,
on the trail, a crazy adventurer. We'd hooked up on the trail during that winter and talked about.
Where did you meet Dimitri?
Yeah, on the Iditarod Trail.
Okay, yeah.
At some point, I hook up with the Iditarod Trail after the Iditarod race. This, well-known, famous dog race. And after the dog race, all these crazy people do the dog race on push bike, walking, running, whatever it is. It's like 1,000 miles or something,
Yeah.
And these guys will do it with nothing more than a pair of running shoes and a plastic bag to sleep in at night. Something stupid. Absolute nutters. Absolute nutters. There's some hard people out there.
Crazy guy.
There's some freaking scary hard people out there doing this kind of stuff. And
you're hard if you're an Alaskan.
Yeah, well, Dimitri was one of these guys who used to be an executive with Microsoft and had taken up adventure racing. And he had heard about me, and we met up at a cabin. There's a logistical cabin on the Iditarod Trail. We met up there one night and talked that evening about doing the Bering Strait together.
Yeah.
To him, it was exciting. It was something that hadn't been done, so we were all up for it. And that's where we kind of teamed up and said, okay, let's do this. I was looking for a partner.
Sure.
That's where that.
That's
so
amazing.
Next year we would hook up in Nome, Alaska. I'd get there eventually. He got there that year. We hooked up in Nome and set up around the peninsula, headed up to Wales, and again, just tremendous adventures along the way. Just terrifying.
It's really, really rough country. It's some of the hardest areas in the world to sort of cross. It's very cold.
I would say the most near-death experiences were all in Alaska, trying to get to the Bering Strait.
Yeah, I mean,
but we were learning the hard way there.
Janet's team, they climbed Denali, and Denali, is I think it's the highest mountain in the United States. But one of the things that makes it so significant is it's the coldest mountain. So that's what gets them on that journey. So Alaska is really known for that torturous sort of cold. Now, when you reach the Bering Straits, and it's quite unbelievable, And I honestly tell you, I've looked at this. I've done a lot of wild stuff in my life and pushed myself to the edge. But this journey across the Bering Straits it's unbelievable, I think. And when I say that, I honestly had, until I met you, I never even heard of it being done. I never even heard of it. Like, this is what? Somebody actually did it? And I was just taken by this whole thing. And I watched the footage, I've read the stories, and it scares the hell out of me just thinking about the moving ice. You're crossing a sea of moving ice that is crunching and crumbling into each other. I just can't even imagine this journey. How did you think it was possible? How did you get to that level? Like, no one's done it before. How do you even think it's possible? Obviously, you've gone through a lot of training going through this Alaskan area, but this is a whole different territory, a whole different monster.
The day I stepped onto the Bering Strait, I had two concerns. One, surviving this and getting off it alive. Two, how was I going to attempt this the next time? Because there was no way in hell we were going to get across the Bering Strait. Right? Everyone I had spoken to says, no, don't be silly, go home.
Yeah.
You know, everyone basically in Alaska was kind of laughing at us. They'd seen the bigger and the better guys, the professionals, not these crazy amateurs who arrive in Alaska and say they're going to do stupid stuff. They'd seen the professionals try and fail a lot, constantly. The year before we tried, Dixie Dancer and another climber, big climber. I mean, Dixie Dancer was, I think he's Danish. He'd done the North Pole, the South Pole. He was a professional adventurer. Him and his partner tried to get across the Bering Straits. 8 days, all they did was got dragged south. One of them almost died, almost got pulled under the ice, saved by his buddy, and then eventually they were rescued by helicopter. We got to meet one of them, the US partner of that, in Anchorage, and we sat down with him and talked about what happened. Everything was against us.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone was saying, look, you're not going to do this. So I really did not expect to make it first time. I thought we were going to hit the Bering Straits a couple of times, bounce off it like a brick wall, and then rethink, learn something, and then we'd develop the strategy. And eventually one day we'd figure it out, but I didn't know how long we were going to be able to do that because the cost. We've trained, we've got what we think is the best plan based upon all previous failed experiences. We'd looked at what everyone had done and said, okay, this is the mistakes we think they're making. This is how we're going to have to do it. We're going to have to be a lot more aggressive. It's going to have to be direct. We're going to have to be amphibious. We're going to have to basically become human sea mammals.
Right.
We're going to have to be able to effectively work in the water as effectively out of the water. All of this, we have to scale down. It's got to be lighter than what the previous expeditions were. So we went for it. We will give it our best shot, but I was not expecting to make it across the Bering Strait.
Oh, amazing. So, in light of that, Karl, what I'd like to do here, I'd like to play a clip.
And Karl's next crossing makes the rest of his journey seem like the actions of a cautious man.
That's a scary place.
It is a scary place. The human beings do not want to be in a place like that. And look at it now. It's hiding its face right now. I mean, it looks so tranquil. The wind's dropped, the sun's out, the sky's blue. You can see where we're going, as clear as day. Nice, solid ice in front of us. Beyond that is the Straits, and it's just a churning, moving freight train of crushed ice and water, and it's the worst place you ever want to be.
But in less than 24 hours, that's exactly where Karl will be. He'll be joined by Dimitri Kiefer, an ultramarathon runner from Normandy.
Okay, there's a red flare on your 11 o'clock.
North 66, west 165, 62 miles from land on a piece of ice in the middle of a sea on top of the world. Karl Bushby and Dimitri Kiefer.
You want to land close to them?
Gangi.
Yeah, I mean, if
They've got a solid piece of ice, so I think we should trust them, yeah?
Yeah, I think that's all right. I've emptied one of the sleds, apparently.
What we then saw was mind-blowing. Two men entering what would kill most of us in a matter of seconds.
Yeah, and make a left, so we... Okay, get around them. Yeah, nearly circle them. Right. But this is good slushing material here.
Boy, that's a lot of work just for a little distance there.
So if you just look at that, the enormous effort that it's taking just to travel, what, 2 or 3 meters? And then, as I can see from the air, he's got to do that all over again in another 10 or 20 meters. This is going to be tough going.
Are an absolute savage, man. Honestly, as I said, I never heard of anybody even trying this or attempting it before, and you succeeded on crossing the Bering Straits. Has anybody else attempted it? Has anybody else ever succeeded after you? And if so, I'm wondering, why isn't this more like an Everest challenge or a pole crossing? This seems like this could be one of those things, but how come more people aren't trying to attempt what you've done?
The reason why is because it's extremely expensive, and the politics as well. You're dealing with Russia in a very sensitive part of the world. The first people to cross the Bering Straits was Dmitry Sparrow and his son, a famous Russian adventurer. I think they made it on their 4th attempt, allegedly, because there's a lot of people questioning whether or not they actually did now. But apparently they have the first crossing from the Russian side. It's a very interesting story. We did a lot of work on that when I got there. That gave us hope. No one had ever made it from the American side. A lot of people had tried and failed. And then after us, there was a Korean team made it from the Russian side as well.
All right. Okay,
I don't know if anybody else has made it since.
This stuff doesn't make it out into the adventure news that much. It's incredible. Yes, I've been following stuff like this. You know, I do it. I'm pretty much an avid guy on Explorer's Web, and always reading about sort of some extreme outdoor crossings, and you know, it's sort of a new thing for me. So incredible. Doesn't get that much media.
And it's luck. We had a lot of luck. People have to realize that, because the Bering Straits normally one of those windiest places in the world. It's the dynamics between the wind and the ocean currents that can make that place lethal. When all of that starts moving rapidly and you get the pressure ridges forming or the ice breaking, it makes it the most dynamic, unpredictable place in the world.
Right.
You know, a combination of water and cold. You don't have long to survive when things go wrong out there. For us, the weather was at its best. When we first got on the ice, when you see those images, that clips that you showed, we got trapped at one point. It was dragging us north quicker than we could go west. We couldn't make any progress west. We had been dragged north. And I remember one night in the tent literally watching numbers on the GPS ticking over.
How many knots were you going?
North, as if on a motorboat.
How fast
is
that?
So we got like 2 or 3 knots.
2 or 3 knots?
Yeah, we were like 2 or 3 knots at that point. So within 2 days, we'd gone like 50 miles north or something like that.
Wow.
And we were just cruising. And I thought, that's it. This is it. You know, this is where we have to get pulled out. And it wasn't the case. As we literally watched it slowed down, and then it started bringing us back.
Tide shifted.
So then the ice brought us back into the Bering Strait. And then the temperatures dropped. So from about almost 0 degrees, because it had warmed up to about 0 degrees, it dropped down to about minus 30. Minus
Everything
34.
got solid for
and
you.
That was enough to put a surface on the ice, and it was enough for us to actually start making progress. The wind stopped.
So that's the
wind dropped off for like a week. It was literally like being Moses watching the Red Sea part.
Wow.
It was that good. It was phenomenal, and that gave us the break. So that gave us enough time and an opportunity to get across the data line into Russia. Things started going wrong in Russia, and we had negative drift. We were coming tired and exhausted. Conditions were so bad that we ended up trying to ditch the sleds and make these homemade backpacks. I almost drowned at one point trying to experiment with this. Went back, got the sleds, and then we thought we were going to lose it. And it came down to one good day, because normally sometimes we could only make a few Ks a day. And one day we made something like 11 kilometers. And it literally put us within reach of the coast of Siberia, and with enough food and fuel, etc. And things suddenly looked very rosy after that. And then, a day or two later, we came in and did what we didn't think we were going to be able to do. what nobody thought we were going to be able to do.
Right.
And unfortunately, we got to within about 500 meters of the coast, and it was my birthday. So I could have made history on my birthday, except we were losing light. Conditions were very bad, so I decided to
place to spend your birthday.
So I decided to call time early, so that we didn't mess up and break a leg or something right before that last push. And then the next morning we went ashore, and I had got to make that phone call, the one that no one believed we would be making. And for me, this is huge. This is everything. Right. This is the crux of the expedition.
Oh,
this
yeah.
is the
You've been fearing this for years, I'm sure. You probably had nightmares. Hey?
This is what it was all about.
Right.
You know, this has all been theory up until this point. So if we could do this, it's downhill for the rest of the way.
Ooh, Karl.
It's kind of the feeling. So arriving in Siberia was just phenomenal. I mean, just absolutely high point.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, at this point, it just keeps getting more interesting as we go on. I think you made the crossing in 14 days, right? From Alaska to
14 days.
14 days. Do you camp? Do you sleep? What was it like?
Yeah, we're both sort of curious. You know, 'cause I was a bit fearful thinking about the moving ice and things breaking up.
How is it?
You know, ice is obviously breaking into pieces. You know, Janet and I were both like, how do you camp?
God decides whether or not you sleep and live on the Bering Strait. And he decided to let us live because, like I said, the weather was amazing. Right. And that makes all the difference. You ain't sleeping if that ice is literally dissolving and breaking and reforming, within 20 minutes. For us, we got lucky, and there was only 1 or 2 times, I think, we ended scrambling out of the tents at night to move the tent because the ice was breaking beneath us. But you would find the biggest pan of ice, and you pitch your tent in the middle, and every morning we'd wake up on the edge. Every morning you wake up on the edge. It was just weird. The whole world would just change.
This is what gives me the fear. I just can't imagine.
And what about polar bears?
We were seriously tooled up. We'd done the work. Yeah, we had a shotgun with anti-bear slugs, and we'd also, made sure that we could use it at night. So we had the reflex scopes, folding stock on the shotgun, all pimped out. I'm an ex-soldier. That's what you do. Yeah. And we had a handgun for the tent. The tent gun was the lightest gun we could find with bear ammunition, because in Alaska you have bear ammunition, because bears don't die easy. You can put a bullet through a bear's heart and it'll keep going for 10 minutes, long enough to tear you apart. And we're dealing with polar bears, which are like, scary bears.
I think I saw some.
Not these Nancy Brown bears, not these Nancy grizzlies, but the real deal, these polar bears. And the Russians had one encounter where a bear had taken down half their tent, and they said it was the handgun that was the only thing that saved them. It happens. Yeah. They were there. So we were ready for it. We encountered a few bears along the way.
Oh, really?
We woke up one morning and found the print outside the tent. We met a bear one day, and it looked at us, and it ran the other way. Our big fear was if we were forced to move at night, is that they hunt you
every day. They actually have to hunt every day because of their metabolism.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, Alaskans love the bear horror stories. So everyone's got a bear horror story.
I saw an interview. You're talking to one of the local native guys.
Yeah, with the teeth.
And he's sitting there, and you got a polar bear head sitting next to you, and he's telling you, he's just looking at you, oh, you're gonna die. He's saying, the polar bears are out there, man. They hunt fast. And you're like,
look at those teeth, and you say, look at my teeth.
So I joked there was I have all these fake teeth here. No, they're a real threat. They're something you got to take seriously. We spent a lot of time thinking about that, and it was one of the reasons we also had night vision equipment as well. Was so that at night we could have that extra standoff. Because if those things get so close to you, there's a certain distance, you're dead.
Sure.
Once they get within a certain distance. So we had the night vision, and was able of using those guns at night as well if needs be. And that's just about as best we could do. And we had flares as well. So the shotgun, the first 1 or 2 rounds were flares. They're actually
Yeah.
shotgun flares.
Just scare them away.
You'd use the flares to scare it away, and if it came down to it, the next ones were solid slugs.
Right.
Okay. Oof.
So, Karl, you've crossed. I have something here that I thought was pretty special. Where is it? Hang on. Okay, so you cross. I love this story. I see an interview with you. You cross, you get apprehended by the FSB.
Yeah.
And you get apprehended for 58 days. And you get out on your journey. How many times have you been put in jail? How many days now?
Yeah, this was the second. When it comes to these gaps, there's a theme developing on these gaps,
Yeah.
I think, where I seem to find myself in jail.
That's your welcome. Welcome.
So, and that said, I think this is quite funny. I have a clip I want to play just at this point. You've gotten out of jail. You've done your 58 days. You're about to venture on in your journey. And there's something you say here, which I just love. So I want to play this for our audience. Maddie, can you pull up clip 4?
I mean, yeah, all right, you got over the Straits, but what you've got coming is by no means easy. We've got 1,500 miles of pretty pristine Arctic tundra, and it's going to be vicious. I reckon this is going to be the most demanding section yet. I certainly feel proud. I know Dimitri does. To make it across the Bering Straits on foot was a big deal. It kicks ass. It's a nasty place to be. So the more people tell you you can't do it, it makes the victory all the better.
Yeah, hey, look, I'm sorry. That actually is not the clip I was thinking about. I don't know if we have it loaded, but there's a story. You're talking about how you cross. You're like, hey, man, we just crossed the Bering Straits, and I thought they were going to give us a better welcoming. But not. That didn't happen.
Oh no, it got serious. Yeah, and there was a couple of things. 2 points in the background of this was the fact that we'd got our visas for Russia through a company out of Seattle that deals, a special travel agency that deals with Russia. We gave them the Bering Strait plan to obtain the visas.
Yeah.
They got the visas and they gave us our passports back with the visas. But what they failed to mention was the fact that they decided that obviously these two guys in their office in Seattle weren't really going to cross the Bering Straits. They're obviously crazy guys.
Yeah.
So the company invented their own route into Russia. You know, the guys are going to fly into this airport, yada, yada, just so that we get the visas.
Yeah.
So we got the visas, thinking that the Russians had seen the Bering Strait plan, give it the green light by giving us the visas. There was one other thing we needed, something called a propusc, which is a special permit for that part of Chukotka, the region of Russia. Because of its proximity to the evil empire, it's a security zone.
Sure.
But there was no information on
military background. This guy's obviously a spy.
Well, that's where it went, you know. So we didn't have the propusc. I wasn't too fussed about it. I had the best opportunity, one of the best winters in 40 years, one of the coldest winters in 40 years. Gives the best ice, best chance to make it. I'm not going to sit around and wait for some bureaucratic whatever, because, hey, I'm not going to actually make it anyway, right?
Yeah.
You know, let's not worry about that. And if we do make it, then all we have to do is come back to Alaska, do the paperwork so that we can continue one day through Siberia. Okay, let's not worry too much about that.
So
I'm facing life and death at the
happy.
Bering Strait. Not going to worry about this. Anyway, we arrive in Russia. Surprise, and certainly surprise the Russians, who have border guards on that very remote Dezhnev Peninsula, looking for the US invasion force. And we rock up talking about having walked across the Bering Strait. That has never happened, so obviously we're lying, right? And of course, the
seriously undercover spy. You're so bad you swam across the Bering Straits.
Yeah, that alone is unbelievable, you know.
So yeah, they suddenly there's a lot of confusion. The bodyguards, you know, they come and pick us up. They come with an armored vehicle. They're all armed, I voluntarily hand over my gun. We ditched the shotgun in the ocean at one point at a desperate point. I hand over the gun and munitions and my GPS, both of which are illegal in this part of the world. So they could have got me for international arms smuggling if they wanted.
Sure.
But they let that one slip. We ended up, on trial. We get put in a kangaroo court in a small village, which was ridiculous. Obviously, we're guilty, and I'm supposed to get kicked out, pay a fine, but we are allowed the option of a retrial. So we opt for the retrial. During this time, of course, we're in detention. Me and Demetrius separated. All our equipment's taken off of us, and it's interviews, sometimes with coffee, on a regular basis, as they try and figure out who we are. And my background, father special forces, I have a lot of contacts with military personnel in the US.
Okay.
Including, we had some low-grade sponsors, like a company that makes bulletproof, ballistic-proof eyeglasses. Were backing me. They have strong connections with the US military. There's all this circumstantial evidence that the FSB find on my laptop. And they present
so
me
this
with,
is where they find that stuff. I was wondering, like, they actually knew this stuff, but they find it on your laptop. Right.
Oh, they go through your emails, your laptop, and everything. So they dig deep into you. And then they get suspicious. They're pretty much convinced that I am what they call a reconnaissance specialist.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You are. And that's not a lie.
Things got a little scary with the FSB. The FSB are willing to put a bullet into you a threat. And they said this to me one night over a couple of bottles of wine and vodka, that they said, you do realize that if you die out there, no one will ever know how it happened, and no one will ever find your body.
How lovely is that? How comforting for you there.
So I was getting these kind of subtle threats or hints
for sure
that were really making things uncomfortable. And the FSB would come out with me and they'd get... So the FSB, the way they would do a lot of this is they'd take me out into Anada, which is the capital, when we were in Anada waiting for this retrial. And they would take us out and they'd buy you the most expensive drinks. There'd be 3 FSB agents. Two of them I knew quite well by this stage, and the other one they said was an FSB psychologist. And then they just go to task. They get you drink. They drink. We all drink.
Yeah.
And then you just
that's
keep
how they
going.
do business.
They're looking for you to make a mistake, right? And so that's this version. But they get drunk too.
Yeah.
And then they start talking shit. That's where it gets
spilling out the
interesting.
details. Yeah.
Because they start saying all this shit, and you're like, holy crap, these guys are serious. They actually think that's something.
So it worked both ways.
That was quite worrying.
Oh my God.
That was quite worrying.
Wow. That's crazy.
You didn't get banned at this point, did you? This is just your 58-day interrogation?
Well, this is the turning point, was when the politicians got involved. And this happened because, remember when I said it was God that got us across the Bering Straits? Well, God hadn't finished with us just yet.
Yeah, he wasn't done with that.
There were a couple of things going on here. So the governor of Chukotka was a guy called Abramovich. He's one of these oligarchs who had a lot of interests in the UK, including the owner of Chelsea Football Club.
Oh.
The deputy prime minister in the UK at the time happened to be the MP from my town.
Wow, how lucky
and when
is
the
that?
press got all over this thing and it was going global, the politicians wanted this thing to go away because it was getting annoying with the press.
How did this guy
And
get here?
so the politicians kind of helped the process along. And basically we were told that just, come the retrial, yes sir, no sir, don't worry about it. It's going to work itself out. So that worked for me. It did not work for the Russian security apparatus that wanted us to go to jail for at least 5 years.
You shamed them.
So once we had got away with that and the original verdict was overturned, I was allowed to return. But then, of course, I had to deal with the FSB, who were less than impressed with the verdict. So I made no friends.
Probably always had their eye on you. There are probably some guys in the organization were like, let's get him in the back alley.
Oh, yeah. So I only had 3 months at a time. And then, so I would have to leave and come back. So now we went into this whole process of where we would wait for months, go back in the next winter, do 3 months, come out and go back. And every time I'd have to deal with the FSB. So I had an FSB handler who was assigned to me on a daily basis. And every time in and out, you'd go through these interrogations. My laptops would be taken off of me. They'd go through everything. They'd come back with photographs taken from my laptop, wanting to know who everybody was. And it was just a constant process where you felt like at any minute, they're going to close this down and this thing's going to end.
Right.
And it's over. Like, it's over. Like, if the Russians don't let me in, I've got
You're
no
done.
options.
There's no other
I've got
route.
to get through Russia. So there's this real delicate
Critical territory, sure.
There's no other way around. You got to get through Siberia.
Yeah.
So it was real touch and go, and then it ended up with getting grabbed at one point, which was a very suspicious ambush, where they were kicking me out. They wouldn't let me back in on the visa ban. So eventually they hit me with a visa ban, and that's where we ended up doing the walk across America
Right.
to the Russian embassy in DC. Managed again, by the luck of the gods, to convince someone in the embassy there to get on our side and let me back in to continue. In the time that it took me to get across what was that on the map, it looked like that on the map of Siberia. I'd done the Americas in that time, years and years through Siberia.
Sure. Carl, let me have you pause here for a second. I want to step in a little bit there. This is somewhere in 2012. Moscow or someone in Russia bans you, right? You're completely banned from Russia. It sounds like this is a dynamic shift in everything. It sounded like who's the guy he got involved with you from the House of Cards? Bo, the guy from House of Cards got involved.
Oh, Whitman, yeah.
Yeah. This guy gets involved with this somewhere around there, it sounds like. And the one thing that I thought was amazing was that how in the hell did you convince yourself to walk 3,000 miles in the wrong direction across the United States to go to the Russian embassy? I was thinking, that's the total opposite way, the way you're supposed to be going, but you're going to actually walk across the United States to go to the embassy. I thought this is an incredible move by you, and what really was that reason, and how did you make that decision?
No, I did not go willingly.
Oh, really?
Bo came up with this.
Oh, okay.
Bo and his partner Jordan. We couldn't think of anything else, so they said, how about this? And they said, this walk across to the DC embassy. And I laughed, and I said, you're kidding me, right? There's no effing way
I can
I'm going
imagine,
3,000 miles in the wrong direction. Have you any idea of what that's going to be like? I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. And then it didn't take long for me to realize that there are no options here. What else are we going to do? We've got to keep the ball rolling somehow.
Okay.
And we'd found out through various channels that the ban had specifically come from the FSB.
Okay.
So it didn't look promising at all. Yeah, I mean, you're up against, Putin's boys. These are Putin's boys. So I was in a pretty dark place. I think things weren't looking great. Remember, I was talking about how I felt like at any time they could close it down, and it looked like that was happening. So I just had to suck it up. Yeah, 3,000 miles in the wrong direction. Not what I wanted to do, but in hindsight, amazing, fantastic.
Yeah, I thought
And
it was
it's
a
funny
miracle.
because way back decades before, one of the first times I'd ever thought about doing a walk while I was in the army, one of the first times I'd ever drawn a line on a map was east to west coast in the US.
Okay.
And so this was an old idea going way back that I'd never get to do. And now I was going to get to do it. So I was like, oh, well, that's pretty. I can do that. And, they got Nat Geo on board and all the rest of it. So,
yeah, really cool.
Yeah. And, having done it, it was an amazing experience. It's great.
Yeah, things happen for a reason. Let me go to a point in your walk from LA to the East Coast. I find this very ironic. Like, you were welcomed in Las Vegas. So I saw the video, and you had the luxurious suite, really nice party, and good food. How was that, Carl?
Well, it's fun. Now, a lot of America was like that, not just Vegas. We put on a bit of a show for Nat Geo in Vegas, of course.
Yeah.
You had to do the Vegas thing and go overboard. We did, and it was fun. And it's great because I just spent quite a while in the desert, and then you turn up in Nevada there, and it was great. Yeah, and obviously not the first time because I'd been there before on the walk, so I was revisiting, and it was just outside of Vegas in Henderson where my paths crossed. So where I'd come up the US, I was now crossing, and it was interesting to stand on that same point where I had walked almost a decade before, going north. It was all a very interesting, fun time.
That was a really great documentary. There was a lot of great things that pulled out of there. I think Janet's got some good questions about your son. I was pretty moved about some of that stuff with your son as well. But one thing I'm thinking about right now is you're somewhere in the Rockies, and I'm seeing you push the beast up over the Rockies. And I know that's a really dangerous place to be on the side of the road, on an icy, cold, wintry road. And I can just imagine there were times where, like, these trucks or these cars might have been coming at you, and there's not much room on the side of the road for you and the beast. I mean, just for me, there were times there I thought, have you had some pretty scary moments?
Oh Christ, I've got endless stories.
You could write a book
the
on
worst
that.
piece of road ever was a stretching. Yeah, that alone. Latin America was a nightmare. I've seen a number of accidents. I've been there with those accidents, but never been the cause of those accidents. Again, like you were just talking about that cold weather there, the Alaskan highway during winter, like in whiteouts on that road, the trucks would kick up so much that you can't see anything, and then just a semi 18-wheeler just appearing out of the mist inches from you, doing 50, was just absolutely horrifying. I mean, it was just, there were times when, I'm absolutely astonished that nothing has hit me on those roads.
You know,
Absolutely.
it's a dangerous place.
In Mexico, I had trucks jackknifing, trying to avoid me. I've been so lucky that no one freaking shot me in Mexico on those roads.
Road rage, get out of the road!
It was brutal. And in these bizarre places like the winters and things like that, it's been amazing how I've got away with what I've got away with. And
it's a dangerous place, Carl. I mean,
Yes.
I took a class when I was younger. I'm sure you met a lot of flaggers on the side of the road. These are the guys that are working road construction, and they're wearing their fluorescent suits. They're called flaggers. They get paid a lot of money. When I was taking school, this was 30 some years ago, they were paying like $25 an hour to stand there and hold a flag. But the reason they pay so much because it's a high death rate. A freaking lot of flaggers die on the side of the road, so it's a dangerous place. And there's so many different scenarios in your story with the cold, the ice, the whiteouts. It's just incredible.
There's some scary ones.
Yeah, it's scary. Your story keeps, coming, and there's
so many
much
stories within the story.
Yeah, and there's really,
so much to unfold here.
And there's really a lot of emotions going on, and you've been very strong mentally, physically, everything in your documentary that, you cried and you just really missed your relatives, your family, your relationships, everything.
That part moved me. There were some parts really got me, and I felt on your journey there must have been so many times heartfelt, and that you had to strive through that.
What do you do to get up and keep moving forward when you hit the wall?
It's a sense of commitment that I think that decision was made before I even hit the ground. I think if you read the book, in the early part of the book there, where I'm having a serious conversation with myself in the UK, understanding, if nothing else, the enormity of what I'm going to do and how I know that this is all coming.
That's an
understatement. I know. I specifically say in the book, I'm gonna end up in love, and I'm gonna get burned badly.
I hear you.
And I'm gonna have to keep going. I'm gonna have to keep doing that. And you kind of commit to that. You know that's coming. You make that decision then. I don't know if there's any difference between me and other people, but you are beholden to that. That's it, because this whole thing is that question about what would it take to get to the other side of this. When I stand in the UK and looked across the Channel Tunnel, and I could see France, I could sometimes, if I squinted, I could almost imagine seeing a figure arriving on the other side in the distance, and trying to imagine who that guy was, trying to imagine what he had seen, what he had lived through, and that was where the obsession was. I had to be that guy. What would it take to get to the other side of the English Channel? That's what it was about. That's what's it going to take, and it was going to take a lot. You committed to it, and you live it, and now, 20 years later, you've lost blood, chunks of flesh, and so much.
Yeah.
Over there, I'm struggling. Still struggling. Asia's been a struggle, which played into some of the decisions that I made in Asia, and I find it hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes nowadays, getting just to get 30 kilometers would take all the energy and willpower in the world. Day in, day out, it gets tough.
Yeah.
I'm not as young as I used to be. That certainly doesn't help.
Young people should hear your story because, at this age that everything is handed out instantly and instant gratitudes, it's like they should know your story and be inspired and learn from what you have to do, and your commitment, your sense of commitment, and the determination and the sacrifice that you're willing to make. I think this is really very inspirational.
Yeah.
I mean, if someone can take something away from this and if it makes a difference in some way, great, awesome.
Yeah.
As Janet said, we were both real touched about the human side, and touching base on that human side is your family back home. Incredible. Your mother and father have been with you, and I say that in not a literal form. They're not here, but they're on your journey with you every step of the way, which I think is really incredible. Your son back home, he came and joined you on this American section, and he was with you for 10 days. And for me, it was like, we have kids, and it's the best thing in my life. And I was so happy to see your son on that journey and having that connection. And I'm wondering, do you guys have plans to do that again here in the future?
My son hates walking, man. I don't think he's gonna do that.
I was wondering, 10 days, it's not for everyone. That's and we have a son.
He could barely walk by the end. He was done. He was done.
The 10 days. Seems
Well,
to be 10 years for
you've
him.
been doing it for quite a few years. You've sort of developed this. One of the things I realized in some of the things that I do, I forget about those first days or, that trial period. So, but I get it. It doesn't work for everyone.
No, but I think this was a very momentous event in your father and son relationship. He got to know you. He got to know what you're doing and what you're fighting for.
Did you guys have some good connections on that part of the trip?
We had seen each other very seldom. There's a lot of distance between us. I'd always imagined in the early days that this expedition would be how we would ultimately connect. Mm-hmm. I had expected to have him join me many more times a lot earlier, but that wasn't to be the case. So this was a very rare, a big moment. Mm-hmm. Scary moment. Like this is very emotionally difficult.
How's this going to go?
Yeah, it's a hard one because there's a lot of things. So we really have a lot still to learn about each other. If a text message every now and then doesn't do it.
Yeah.
And I think after this thing is over, there's going to have to be I got to answer a lot of questions. We might have to have it out in a bar one night, but I think we'll move on at some point.
You get across America. This one got me too. I see you're at the front doorsteps of the Russian embassy, and I'm sure at this point you probably think, no way in hell am I ever going to get a visa, I reckon you're thinking this, but when you were at the doorsteps of the Russian embassy, I thought I heard you speaking into the intercom Russian, but I'm not sure. Maybe I'm wrong here. But do you speak Russian? And then you came out of the Russian embassy with a visa in your hand. Like, I was actually blown away, like how it happened so fast.
Well, I think before we got to the embassy, we knew this was a done deal because we've been communicating with them. And so the big surprise came before that. It was basically the formalities to go and get the visa. Mm-hmm. And it's from Nat Geo, so it was done the way it was done. I mean, I utter a couple of words of Russian. You'd think I know a lot more, but
got you in the gate anyway.
So the first time I ever learned that the Russians were even going to think about letting me back in was a shock. Absolute shock. I never believed this would work.
Right. That's how I took it. That's how I thought. You're
great.
like, hey man,
Awesome.
it's not happening. I'm stuffed.
Yeah. Now, and it was strange because I'd kind of already committed to the long wait. So I was already thinking about how I'm going to get around the next 5 years of a visa ban.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm strategizing and I'm coming up with ideas and I'm making plans and I'm getting somewhere with that plan and I'm mentally preparing myself. And then one day Westwood got back to me and said, look, you're going to get your visa. And I went into kind of shock. I couldn't quite work out what was happening. And I'm just blown away. And now I'm like, wait, now I've got to rethink life. And I wasn't even sure I wanted to go back at this point because there was other people involved that I might want to see. And oh my God, it was just such a weird time. Yeah, such a shock that it just upended life and all the work I'd been doing in the background, thinking that I wasn't going back.
Yeah.
Not anytime soon.
You got your Russian visa, and the way I understood that crossing Russia was difficult because of the territory. You had to really do it during the late winter, as you're saying. And I presume you were really have a journey where you're worried about the FSB when you go back there. I'm sure, like probably scared as hell of these guys. And so tell us about getting across Russia and then breaking into Mongolia, because Mongolia, I have a little bit of stuff there that we do understand about your journey, and it looks like it's a pretty cool section as well. So what happened at this point?
Yeah, Russia was complicated because there wasn't only just the visa ban, because before the visa ban was the financial crisis. That was 2 years out of Russia. That was 2 years in Mexico, having lost sponsors, having no money, surviving. And that's when Bo Willimon came along. That's where he found me, in Mexico, the first time. And it was the book that managed to pull that off for me. He found my book before he found me.
I read that, yeah.
Right. So Russia was, it was hard, it was difficult, it was the geopolitics was a nightmare, it was slow and frustrating and incredibly expensive. Because you're dealing with one of the most remote parts of the world. There's no infrastructure. Everything is so difficult up there, not to mention, the weather conditions. And eventually we make our way south, things get better. The FSB leave me alone. After the crossing of the US, when I went back into Russia after that, the FSB disappeared.
Oh.
Never heard from them again.
Interesting.
Huge relief. Eventually we get to the southern border, we make our way down, life's getting easy because we're on the roads. And then eventually I hit the border with Mongolia. I get fined one more time by the Russians before I can leave, by the border guards, because I camped where I shouldn't. And then I cross and manage to get out of Russia into Mongolia, and I'm absolutely ecstatic.
Wow. Yeah. Mongolia. Mongolia reminds me a lot about Tibet, Carl. I've been in the north side of Everest, and it's just like endless stretch of rocks. So what was it like for you crossing the kind of terrain?
I mean, you step out of Russia, literally just close to the border there, you leave the forests, you're on the steppes, and then it's just this vast, mind-numbingly nothingness that just messes with your head again. And the steppe goes on forever and ever. The steppes just go on forever and they don't change. You're dealing with the wind. It's like being back in Patagonia. Some days it's brutal. When I crossed the border into Mongolia, it was like stepping into a Shakespeare play where everyone is in costume.
Right.
And
that's one
hundreds of
thing.
years ago.
You guys all had these crazy Mongolian,
It's
even
bizarre.
you and your team.
It's cool.
If you step out of Russia, which is moderately, European, and you step into a land where everyone's in costume and everyone's on horseback, and it's weird.
I liked it. I liked
Twilight
some of the stuff
Zone.
I saw there. It
I
looked like a
know.
cool part of the journey.
Like the camel and
You
everything.
go back in time. You go back in time. Families living in yurts, living off their animals, and it's fascinating. It's an interesting place.
There's a lot of people who joined you in Mongolian crossing, and one of them we have also met in Dubai, our fellow adventurer Jamie Ramsey. So tell us about how did this group put together, how did you meet, and what was it like to be with this group?
Well, remember we talked about how mentally been lonely over quite long periods of times, and I think when I got to Ulaanbaatar, I was at a low point there, where I was so tired, and it was one of those times where I was having a bit of a tough time imagining starting beyond Ulaanbaatar. Yeah, so we end up by coincidence meeting a group of people, sitting around in someone's living room until 6 a.m. on wine. And the best things happen over wine, right? Naturally.
Of course, man.
And during that night, yeah, absolutely. And during that night, one of these guys mentioned walking or taking camels to Europe. And this was part of our conversation about a guy who had rode a horse across the steppes from Mongolia to Hungary. And they mentioned the camels and these animals, and I kind of thought about it briefly, and I was like, well, good luck with that, because hell, I have a hard time getting across these borders myself a lot of the time with these visas. Cannot imagine what it would be like trying to use animals to get across these borders.
Sure. Yeah.
So I ignored it, and then, but afterwards, over the next few days, I'm thinking, I can't quite let it go. It's in the back of my head, and it really starts to bug me because it starts to sound more feasible. The more I think about it, the more feasible it becomes. And it's exciting. It's a challenge. And I'm like, wait, we could do this. And so I start putting all these plans together. And then I go back to these people, especially these Mongolians, in particular, this Mongolian woman who apparently it was originally her idea. And I say, I think there's a chance we could pull this off. She goes crazy. She loves it. This is, jumping up and down and screaming. It's one of her life's dreams or whatever. And I'm like, well, everyone calm down. My sponsors ain't going to go with this. My sponsors are not going to go with this. Because we're talking about a camel train, the longest camel train in history, all the way through Europe, from the old Silk Road,
right.
Central Asia, at least into Europe. Can you imagine that? That would be ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't know how that's
the amount
possible.
of work facing us is just nuts.
Is it possible?
But so I think it's possible. Okay. I think it would be possible, but it would be tough. So I go to my sponsors and I pitch it to them, and they're like, "Yeah, sounds awesome. We'll give you like $5,000."
Got my food money. Let's do it.
So the ball starts rolling and it starts running away from me at this point.
Yeah.
So now I'm thinking a team. What the most appealing part of this, not so much the camels, but the most appealing part of this was living with a team on the road.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm still walking. It's the same thing. Now all we're doing is I have company. I have a team of people. We have these animals as backpack animals. It's a whole new thing, a whole new adventure, almost unimaginable. It's a fantastic romantic idea. Yeah.
I can't imagine doing the Silk Road with a camel train with a mixed international team.
Totally.
It looks beautiful.
Yeah.
The imagery is optics. It's fantastic. So I really get into it and I start putting the plan together. I realize that the key to this could be China. I think that's where the funding and the support's got to be. They could open up they could open up the rest of Central Asia, Middle East, I think, if we get them on board. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we've got to get the Mongolians on board. So and then the next thing you know, we've bought 10 camels. I'm the proud owner of 10 freaking camels. And these are young male camels. They haven't been trained, so we have to build a camel training.
Now you're a camel whisperer.
Now I'm a camel whisperer. So literally, we have to learn how to work with these camels. And the Mongolians with us have done this. They know the camels. We get some camel herders to come in and help us do this. But man, what a learning experience that was. And then we start reaching out to, people like, you met Jamie, and a few others, Westerners who were crazy enough to give a go.
There was another girl on
the idea is to get these camels, not so much the team. The team would probably rotate. People would come and go, and there'd be a couple of core members that would stay all the way. And that was the idea.
Who's this?
And we started to build a team.
Who's this Angela?
Go ahead.
Angela, that was she was on
Angela.
She's covered a lot of miles walking as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So the idea was to put together an international team of crazy people who do this stuff.
Yeah, you guys all look great.
So Angela, I'd met Angela when crossing the United States. So while I was crossing the United States, she was planning her walk around the world, and she joined me for a few days, trying learn the ropes. So we hit the road together, and it was a fun time. It was interesting. She was one of the people I first reached out to. At the time, she was kind of off the road, doing something, and she got on board, and she brought other people with her, including Jamie, who came along. It was a really interesting mix of
Looked like a lot of fun. I was thinking that would be a nice. I would
crazy
really enjoy
professionals
joining
like Jamie.
that section. Saw you guys sitting in the yurts,
Yeah,
singing
yeah.
songs, drinking tea. Looked like a pretty amazing journey. It's something tourists would pay for.
Well, I think that really the team, the camaraderie, the
Yeah,
companionship,
it looks great.
yeah, made a lot of difference.
Well, this is what it was all about.
Yeah.
It was about the team, and then ultimately it became about would the team be able to do it. I mean, the videos that you watched look fantastic, but you're not seeing the reality behind the scenes.
Yeah, behind the scenes. Yes, I agree with that.
A freaking mad war with the Mongolians.
Really?
And it got to the point where it got so dangerous
Really?
that I quit. Yeah.
Crazy.
It
You're
got
kidding
terrible.
me. Really? How did that
Yeah.
go? What do you mean by war? What took place? And is this you
It
actually got out of the whole thing because of it?
Before we even left Ulaanbaatar and began this thing, we were lawyering up on both sides.
Oh my God.
It was
Really?
hanging by a thread. Team members would eventually leave because of the stress at first. And eventually it would just be me and this Mongolian girl, who was like my arch nemesis in life right now.
Wow.
And it got to the point where, I mean, I don't want to go into too much details publicly, but let's just say I was literally scared that the entire journey could have been brought down
Wow.
by this one individual.
Yeah.
And I got out, and I think I got out just in time.
That isn't the first time you got out by the skin of your teeth.
No, I mean, it was, this one was a big loss. We'd put so much into this. We got it going. It was brilliant and amazing. And I wanted to get this home. And I'd seen that this was going to be the rest of the journey. And then I couldn't hang on to it. I couldn't make the team work. I couldn't. And for a long time afterwards, it really, really bothered me. Like I really have a hard time getting over that one.
That's it.
It was a big
I
loss.
get it.
Some you win, some you lose.
Yeah, mate,
This
that's it.
one I lost big.
Yeah, it's how it goes, man. Sometimes things don't work out. And
What we did was amazing. What we did was an experience I wouldn't change the world for. Life on the road with the camels was amazing. And I missed the camels for quite a while. Because you get to know them
yeah,
personally.
yeah, it's
Very up close and personal.
Wow.
cool.
So, yeah, it's a real shame.
So yeah.
So, Karl, after this section here, again, bring us up to speed. What happened? Where are you now? Like, you're sort of coming to the end of, I'm guessing, about where you're at. I'm not sure. Where are you at now? Bring us up to speed. What's happening?
Right. Well, for those of you who don't know, this is not my tent. And I'm in Mexico. And I've been here for a year.
Yeah.
So we've hit one of those walls again. And it started with me finishing the walk across Turkmenistan. I had 30 days to get across Turkmenistan. I arrive on the border with Iran just in time.
Okay.
Now, Iran is problematic because at the time there were a lot of tensions with the United States. I arrived on the border with Iran just after they hit the Saudi oil refineries.
Yep.
And everyone is talking about war.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a British passport, which basically means I'm no different from a US, so different from a US passport. So we have to come out. Yeah, so we've got to come out. We've got to come out. So I go back to Los Angeles with my sponsors while we figure this out. And the idea is we've got to work on Iran. We've got to get the visa and get back in and get going. We didn't know how long this was going to take. We had to have some long, hard talks about where we were going here. And while that was happening, the situation in Iran was deteriorating. Things weren't getting any better. And then eventually, before Christmas, the US drop a hellfire on Soleimani.
Yeah, that's right.
This popular Iranian general. And the next thing you know, there's Iranian rockets flying over the borders to US bases, and things are terrible. Between those times, we had managed to find a contact within Iran who could get me the visa. It's taken a long time to get to that point because no one in Iran wanted to talk to us. None of the touring companies wanted to back us. No one would, and it was getting difficult. We found a guy in the right place who worked in an embassy. He was willing to help us, and then this kicked off. He said he could no longer talk to us. He disappeared. Over Christmas, we're sitting, things look bad, and we're deciding that it's going to take longer than we think. Then sometime after Christmas, I start talking to this Iranian guy again. We start the process of communicating. We start talking, so we're back on track. And that leads us into spring. And you know what happens next?
Yeah, there we go. COVID
kicks in.
So,
everything disappears.
Yeah, where does
First
this
company get hit hard by COVID outside of China happened to be Iran.
Man,
so
I don't want to put any jinx on your trip, but you're up against a lot now. Do you have options? Is there any sort of walkarounds at this point that you're contemplating? Obviously, COVID's going to stuff things up in the future. There's a hell of a lot more restrictions on borders all over the world, and we're not allowed to even leave to go to another island in our own country. Let alone look at your journey and what's happening here in the future. Yeah. So where are you going with this? Do you have any sort of workarounds that you're looking at right now?
Yeah, it's a bit of a rock and a hard place. Remember that place called Russia?
Oh, yeah,
because that's our only other option.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't think they're going to let me back in. The only other country I've been denied access was Turkmenistan. No, not Turkmenistan, sorry, Kazakhstan.
Mm-hmm.
And they wouldn't let me into the country because of what happened in Russia, because of the close ties with Russia.
Yep.
They wouldn't let me across their border. And it was Russia related. So we suspect that I won't be allowed back in Russia. We don't know that for sure. But Russia would be the only other option here, is to lose Turkmenistan, backtrack to Uzbekistan,
mm-hmm.
swing north from Uzbekistan up through the deserts into the north of the Caspian, and then back into Russia. We don't want to go into eastern Ukraine. We'd probably drop down through the Caucasus, through Georgia into Turkey. So it'd be a big,
oh my God, just a big
1,000-mile loop added on. And we really don't want to do that, largely because another part of this journey right now is the documentation of this journey.
Mm-hmm.
And the guys who have been sponsoring me now for over 10 years need to make some money on this.
Yeah.
Get some of the money that they put into it.
And I'm sure everything's stuffed up with the whole COVID thing, A lot of people
Now we're stuffed up. So we're in a bit of a rock and a hard place where we don't know if we got options.
Right.
And so we're kind of waiting this out at the moment to see if things might change. Up until just recently, it doesn't look so promising now that this third wave is kicking in, and now everyone's locking down again.
Mm-hmm.
Turkmenistan has been closed. I can't go in or out. All my equipment is in Turkmenistan, and I don't know when that border is going to
open. So your gear is even stuck.
The gear's stuck. Now, we could get the gear. We could pay someone to take that gear.
Sure.
And take it to the border of Uzbekistan.
Mm-hmm.
That's an option. But we don't really want to do that because Iran would be such an amazing experience. I so badly want to go into Iran that I'm willing to wait it out. I just don't know if we're willing to wait this long now. And we've got to figure out whether or not I can get back into Russia.
Yeah.
So I think sooner or later,
You have a timeline for that,
We're gonna
or
make
you
this-
make those decisions when the boys are saying it's too long, we got to do something, we got to move? Do they have a timeline on that?
We don't. Nobody knows.
Okay.
Nobody knows. The guys don't know what's going on. They've had to roll back all activity. They're in suspended animation, like I am. Maybe we'll be willing to wait until after Christmas and look what it looks like on the other side. See if there's a vaccine out there, seeing if that changes people's opinions.
Seems like the whole
if
world's
that
sort of
happens,
hinging
then
on
great.
that date right now. Yeah.
But, you know, people are talking about this thing dragging on it well into 2001. So I don't know. We don't know.
Well,
I think patience is running short, though.
Australia's not. They're saying they're not allowed to leave their country till 2022. That's official.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Australians were locked in. We could go into New Zealand. It's
Yeah.
the same. A lot of countries are. Unfortunately, the most important one to me is Turkmenistan, and I can't go back there. And I need to go back there, and then I need to get into Iran. So I've got this double problem that I face that's difficult in the best of time. And then there's the Russia thing again. Because I was kind of hoping I'd never go back to Russia, but I might have to. We don't know.
Wow.
Stay tuned.
Well, Karl, here we are. We're about out of time, and I'd like to wrap it up. A few last things I want to say. One, I want to tell our audience to definitely get out, find that book on Giant Steps by Karl Bushby. I think you can find it on Amazon. And I also want to thank you, Karl, for joining us and enlighten us. There's still probably thousands and thousands of stories within this story. Your journey is actually remarkable. Exploration, humanity is really born on exploration. It's the very fabric of our life, and you really are a person that sort of is the epitome of this. You've devoted your whole life to it, and you've stayed to it, and you're staying the course. So I'm very proud to meet you. I feel very honored and so grateful that we met in Dubai and that we can carry on with our relationship. Hoping that one day that Janet and I can meet you on the road and share some miles. We love trekking. It's not for everyone, but we get a bit of bliss out of it. Just walking, and having a bit of a schedule every day and having your tea and moving forward. It's a great thing for us. So we're hoping that one day we can join you. Maybe it won't be for a long period, but it'll be for a short period just to hang out and share some time together. We'd like to do that one day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It'll be fun.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. What time is it there now, guys? It must be late.
What time is it?
What time is it there now?
3:37 in the morning. I think we're about to crack a beer and start the party.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
It's really nice.
All right, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my friend. So cool to see you again. We're going to sign off.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Take
you,
care of
Karl.
yourself, Karl. Talk again soon, eh?
All the best, guys. Have a good day.
See you.
Yeah.